Hello, everyone. Hello, Lily. Hello, Scronin. Hello, Wastelander. I'm starting book 3. Oh, and hello, Rasa. And hello, Noelle. Wow. We're starting book 3 of Magical Girl Raising Project, which is, what do I want to say? The second half of the arc that started in book 2. Just to keep in mind in case you don't want spoilers for this arc or series. Have a list of all the wonderful voices that are being contributed. But also, when I first open the cover, the first image I see is this one. I'll share that with you. And I turn the page and it shows us who all is alive, dead, and unknown at this point. We have Petchka, who is alive, voiced by Scrappy. Plantail, alive, which will be voiced by me. We have Nonaka Miyokata, who is also alive, voiced by me. We have Genosaiko Yumanoshima, who is unknown, voiced by Hugh. We have Shadow Gale, who is alive, voiced by Scruffy. We have Meow Meow, who is unknown, voiced by Chalky. We have Rionetta, alive, voiced by Magenta. We have Magical Daisy, who is dead. I think Cuddle voiced Magical Daisy. We delete the names of who died, but didn't think to leave that for going over this current status here. We have Noko, who is alive, voiced by Snuggle. Masked Wonder, who is dead, voiced by, I think, Q. We have Flea, who is alive, voiced by Magenta. We have Akane, who is dead, voiced by Hollow. Lapis Lazuli is alive, voiced by Cuddle. We have Cherna Mouse, who is dead, voiced by Chalky. We have Detect Bell, who is alive, voiced by Scare. We have Melville, who is alive, voiced by me. And we have Keek, who, it doesn't say what her status is, but she is alive. And I'm assuming it doesn't say her status because she's not a part of the survival game. And she is voiced by Pookie. And then we have Fall, who is voiced by Gadget. And I voiced the narrator. Hello, Fuki! You made it before I started, yes! Hello. I have some Minecraft music playing. It might be a little loud, I'll turn it down. I thought Minecraft music actually would be really, really perfect for this reading stream here. Minecraft. See. I looked ahead to see where I would be stopping. I think I'm going to read to the end of page 70 tonight. It is very nice, yes. Alright, and now I'll delete this image. We have a little, what do they call that? What is the opposite of an epilogue? little page that happens before the next chapter. Oh, it's funny how the first chapter in this book is chapter 6, which kind of makes sense because it's like the second half of book 2, the arc that started in book 2, the second half of Restart, but it is a book. Prologue, maybe. I usually think of a prologue at the beginning of a story, not just a book. That is probably the best word to use. Interlog. We have a What is Magical Girl Raising Project? Simple and fun for beginners, yet deep enough to keep experts addicted. Features magical tree system controls that feel just like real life. Amazing, ultra realistic graphics. An ever increasing library of items to get your collector spirit burning. Completely free to play, no purchase required, ever. Magical girls, welcome to a world of swords and fantasy. We're relaunching Magical Girl Raising Project as a mobile game specifically for magical girls. In this game, you will take on the role of the evil king. All those around you are enemies you must defeat. Hide your true identity, scheme in silence, and pursue your goal. You'll need strength, kindness, knowledge, and courage, or you'll never be able to win, even if you are the evil king, because being the evil king does not confer upon you any special abilities. There's only one thing that makes you different, and that's your condition for completion of the game. Turn the tables on the reckless and foolhardy, and bring peace to the world of evil. Objective: to kill all other players. Completion reward: 10 billion yen. Area unlock award: 1 million yen. Participation award: 100,000 yen. Received even in the case of a game over. Chapter 6: Negative and Positive. Detect Bell. Never you stop! Charge! Melville's voice behind the girls pushed them out of their frozen stupor, and with near-perfect synchronicity, they all leaped into action. Keeping her shield between herself and the dragon, Noko moved into position to protect Janosaiko and Meow Meow as she beat out the fire on their bodies with her mop. Behind her cover, she turned on her magical phone and used recovery items on the pair lying motionless on the ground. Detect Bell ran, silently praying that the dragon would not come her way. She'd been told that the solid weight of the shield +5 in her hands, and the shining blue water charm hanging from her neck would keep her safe, but that explanation wasn't enough to convince her terrified heart. Ahead, lapis lazuli blocked the dragon's flames, but the violent impact was too much for her shield to absorb, and it drove her to her knees. The remnants of the flames danced on the flagstones, close enough to nearly bowl them over with the waves of heat. Brianetta ran past them on the right, Nonaka Miyokata on the left, as the dragon's fire-breathing rampage grew even more aggressive. One of the jets rocketed toward Detect Bell, and she hunkered down on one knee, with her shield tilted up at a 40-degree angle from the ground. She bit back a curse. The fire was igniting everything it could reach: the fringes of her cape, the ends of her ribbon, the hem of her skirt, and even leaping to her hair as well, producing sparks. The awful stench of scorched protein reached her nose despite the cavern's moldy smell. Her skin was burning. It was hot, so hot, and painful. Detect Bell couldn't tell what had happened to her left eye, but her eyelid wouldn't open. Under the shelter of her shield, she activated her magical phone to use recovery medicine on herself, praying all the while that no more attacks would come her way. Her role was supposedly escorting the others into battle, so it was funny that she was pleading to be spared when she should have been playing decoy. But still, reason and emotion are two different things, and the pain she was experiencing just then was affecting her emotions considerably. The survival instincts underpinning her fear warned that she couldn't afford to get hit again. Someone cried out. Though Detect Bell felt like she was about to die, she looked toward the scream source and found Clantail, her lower body transformed into a grasshopper, collapsed on the ground near the platform. The dragon's thick, long tail was whipping up a gust of wind. It looked like Clantail had attempted to leap high onto the circular platform, but the tail had flung her off. A javelin pierced the dragon's tail, and several scales flaked off. Blood gushed from the wound. The bodily fluid, resembling muddy red mucus, was flowing toward Detect Bell. The dragon rose from where it lay, onto all fours. The injury had arranged it. The creature was big enough already, and this just made it look even more imposing. A mere glance from its golden eyes paralyzed Detective Bell with terror. It glared at Melville, but didn't attack her. She was behind the red line. The flames and claws wouldn't reach her. The dragon turned to the fallen Clantail and spit flame. Clantail held the dragon killer dagger. It was fair to say that their fates were riding on whether she could hit the dragon, and the dragon wasn't targeting Melville, who attacked from outside its firing range. It had deliberately sought out Clantail and gone for her. That didn't seem like a coincidence. Was it just instinct? No. The dragon's cheeks were pulled back. Was it smiling? Detective Bell was shocked. They discussed their strategy right here in this cavern, right in front of the dragon. They had assumed the monsters had hardly any intellect, and so wouldn't be able to understand human language, either despite the fact that none of them could have known for sure. But then, right as the flames left the reptile's mouth, a blue glimmer arced through the air, and rolled to a stop just ahead of Clantail. Lapis lazuli, her shield raised, blocked the flames. The fire continued with a second and third shot. Detective Bell ran toward them, as did the other girls, but they didn't make it. After the third breath, Lapis lazuli was blown backward, tumbling away until the rock wall forcibly stopped her. Her arms dangled limply, unable to hold up her shield as she slumped against the wall. The dragon inhaled a breath to finish off Clantail, collapsed behind Lapis lazuli, but then it paused, its cheeks bulging. Its target was gone. Lips pressed tight against the pressure in its cheeks. It looked around, but Clantail wasn't to be seen. Before the dragon could find the target for its attack, a javelin pierced its throat, and the aimless count of fire disappeared just before the red line. The dragon reared on its hind legs and howled, burying the malice and intelligence Detective Bell had glimpsed, revealing its bestial nature, roaring until the cavern collapsed. Cracks ran up the rock walls. Stalactites crumbled, and the rope ladder swayed wildly. The roar might have damaged human eardrums, or even knocked a human out with a concussion. Even a magical girl like Detective Bell felt her knees nearly give way. She looked up at the rearing dragon, and the ceiling beyond it caught her eye. Something was holding on up there. It was faintly gray, sparsely flecked with color, and had a long tail. The 5 toes of each foot were splayed wide, sticking fast to the ceiling. It was a gecko. If Detective Bell remembered right, hundreds of thousands of ultrafine hairs grew on those toe pads, producing a unique, attractive force between them and any object they touched, and causing the gecko to cling, or so she had read in some article on an internet news site or something. Clantail, her lower body transformed into a gecko, hid from the dragon's howl and softly dropped down from the ceiling. In her right hand, she grasped the dagger. The great dragon, roaring to intimidate its enemies, and also most likely to embolden itself, was so loud that it didn't notice the attack from above. Clantail thrust the dagger into the dragon's crown, and a few seconds later, the earth shuddered below as it fell. Though it had been stabbed by a mere dagger, a large volume of blood gushed from the great dragon's head, and its head and forelegs tumbled forward as it collapsed. Even now, Detective Bell's knees wanted to tremble, but she forced herself to run toward Lazaline, who was still leaning motionless against the rock wall. 2 hours later, a sudden gust of wind swept through the burned stench, choking the underground cavern. Looking up, Detective Bell saw light slanting in through the hole in the ceiling. The air must have blown in from there. The blood smell that had filled the place only moments ago was already gone, not because the wind had carried it out, but because the great dragon's body, the source of the odor, had vanished. Monster bodies vanished a set amount of time after their defeat. The dragon was gone, as was its vicious red blood, and the only reek of everything it had charred had remained. Though the monster's bodies would go, The players' bodies did not. Detective Bell had investigated every single spot she could. The carved rock walls, the tiled flagstones, the curved red line on the flagstones, the circular platform over 20 yards wide in the center of the red circle, the rope bridge hanging above the platform, and the hole leading beyond. She couldn't sniff out anything suspicious on the floor, walls, or elsewhere. Detective Bell sighed. She had even thoroughly examined the dead magical girls' bodies. It had made her sick just to look, but still, she'd closely and carefully mobilized all the knowledge at her disposal. Though her inspection wasn't really reliable enough to be called an autopsy, she had examined them anyway. A set of footsteps echoed across the stone floor of the massive cavern, which had once been a great 50-foot-long creature with room to spare. The sound gradually got louder, then stopped. "So, any results?" Flea asked, light-hearted, astride Shadow Gale's back. "Nothing good." Detective Bell shook her head heavily. Genoseiko Yumenoshima had killed Meow Meow. While the great dragon's flame had been the direct cause of their deaths, Genoseiko's actions had clearly led to that attack. Had Genoseiko been following them? Meow Meow had been at the rear, but they couldn't ask her any questions now. Noko, who had been walking second to last, had said she'd checked behind them a number of times, but there had been no sign of anyone following them, or so Detective Bell had thought, which meant that Genoseiko must have been very good at tailing. If Genoseiko had been following them, then she had to have heard Flea's explanation at the beginning, that anyone who crossed the red line would be mercilessly showered with the dragon's flaming breath. Those flames had been powerful enough to evaporate a fist-sized rock, and as Rianetta had put it, hot enough to turn you into a black smudge. Genoseiko Yumenoshima's magic had been her invincible suit. She had said that as long as her visor was down, she could even jump into a sea of magma and be okay. But for some reason, she had lifted her visor and was burned coal-black to the core. If Meow Meow had been cooked like a Kamakura ham, then Genoseiko was charcoal. Well, here's a picture. There's Detective Bell, Flea, and Shadowgale. She had been carbonized, leaving hardly a trace of her remains. The reason Meow Meow was better off had to be because she'd been equipped with the water charm accessory, which gave her resistance to fire attacks. She hadn't used her shield, so the flames had burned her up, but the water charm had still taken effect. In other words, that meant that Genoseiko had leaped onto Meow Meow with no flame-resistant equipment, her visor up, and leaving her entirely unguarded, so she could be burned to a crisp. She had been prepared all along to take Meow Meow down with her. It hadn't really been an attack, more like forced double suicide. When Melville, Cherna, and Lazaline had witnessed Genoseiko's actions, they'd also been left a message hinting of a traitor among them. Detective Bell had seen that message herself. Was Meow Meow the traitor Genoseiko had been referring to? Had Genoseiko, through some means, discovered that Meow Meow was a traitor and killed her in order to stop her, to punish her, to get revenge? Flea swept her bangs back and gazed up at the platform. When she reached for her chair, her elbow hit the back of Shadowgale's head, making her mouth yelp. "Does it look like further investigation will benefit us at all?" Flea asked. Detective Bell looked up at Flea. With her bangs out of the way, her eye patch was clear to see. It was in the shape of a little bird, classy and sweet, and somehow silly too. "I believe I've investigated everything I should," Detective Bell replied. "All right, thank you, Detective Bell. Just one more thing then." Flea's gaze shifted from the platform to the hole above it. Two figures were descending the rope ladder from the opening. The boisterous one was Lapis Lazuli. Of all the survivors, she had to have been most seriously wounded. But after her recovery, she was just as chatty as ever. The next one down was Noko. She was glum, showing no reaction to Lazaline's babbling. Detective Bell sympathized entirely with Noko's depression. Of course she would be upset. What didn't seem natural was Lazaline's chipper attitude. She had acted as Clantail's shield and ended up badly hurt. One more hit and she would have died. But despite all that, she was acting like her usual bubbly, loud, idiotic self.
Could you help bury the two of them?
Asked Flea. The remark came while Detective Bell was lost in thought, figuring she should hurry up her investigation, and she looked over at the other girl without thinking. She gazed at her for a while, then silently nodded. Some more. Noko. Except for the girls who were particularly proud of their strength, no one had objected when Noko said she wanted to dig the graves herself. They looked sorry for her, as if she was terribly tragic and pitiful. Clantail approached her quietly, put out her magical phone, turned to Noko, and did something with it. There was an electronic sound. Use that. She spoke so briefly it was hard to tell, but Clantail had most likely transferred an item to her out of kindness. The word shovel was displayed on Noko's magical phone. Noko used the shovel to begin digging 2 holes and piling the earth that would cover their bodies. Come to think of it, she'd helped with burials a number of times since Daisy's death. This time, now that they had the shovel thanks to R, the big job of digging graves for Meow Meow and the others was a lot easier.
I'm the strongest, so I'll dig the holes.
Scooper? He's pulling at her headphone cord. Oh God. Scooper? Lazaline said to her, perhaps because she believed Noko was hurting. Maybe she was trying to be considerate since Meow Meow and Genocycle, Noko's 2 allies, had killed each other, leaving her on her own.
No, I'll do it,
said Noko.
You should just leave it to Lazaline and me,
Detective Bell said. But Noko shook her head at her too.
I want to do it. I'm sorry, but could I ask you for some stones to leave on top?
She stuck the shovel into the ground. If a human attempted to dig a hole big enough to bury a whole body in this hard wasteland, the job might take half a day. But Noko, though smaller than the others, still had the strength of a magical girl. Quickly and efficiently, she had no trouble breaking into the ground and piling up the earth from the hole beside it. Noko eyed the blade of the shovel. There was no chips, breaks, or dents. It was sturdy, and it stood up to a magical girl's strength, too. Meow Meow's body was in such a horrible state it hurt to look at, while Genocyco's corpse was difficult to even recognize as a body. Maybe Lazaline had wanted to take over the grave digging in order to spare Noko from seeing this. Once Noko was done burying the bodies, she packed the dirt back in and made 2 earth mounds. On top of those, she placed the small fist-sized stones that Detective Bell and Lazaline had gathered for her. She would use these instead of grave markers. Now there were 6 graves lined up outside the wasteland town.
How many more are there going to be?
Noko couldn't help thinking with a shudder before immediately erasing the thought. Noko stabbed her shovel into the ground, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, and looked up at the sky. The glare of the sun was aggravating. It was scorching and bright, as it was every day. Lazaline squatted before the graves and put her hands together.
Sorry, they're just makeshift graves.
Noko squatted down too, pressing her palms together and closing her eyes. Shadowgale. From the platform, she could overlook the whole cavern. Detective had been investigating the area, but she was now gone. She had left to meet up with the others, trailblazing into the new area. They would be exploring and beating things up in the next level. With everyone gone, the cavern felt incredibly lonely. Until all the magical girls had come, the great dragon must have just been gazing at these sights the whole time, all alone. It was just a monster in a game, just a lump of data. And though Shadowgale thought it was stupid to feel empathy for such a thing, even so, she wouldn't have wanted to need to take up such a role. Um, you're getting sentimental right now, aren't you? Came a whisper in her ear, and Shadowgale's feelings evaporated. But I'm not here to criticize you. Just stop thinking about our friend, the Great Dragon, said Flea. Stop reading my mind, Shadowgale shot back. We've known each other for such a long time. I can read your mind as much as I want. For example, you think I act like an old man. I mean, you do. Oh, but being concerned about the comfort of your desk chair and saving up all your allowance to scour shopping sites for one is normal for a sprightly youth. That's more senior citizen-like. Oh, hello, Eel. Welcome. That's none of your business. If you're going to be sympathizing with our dear Great Dragon situation, then it seems you won't be able to carry out the mission I have planned for you. Her voice lowered. With Flea on Shadowgale's back, Shadowgale couldn't see her face, but she seemed to be speaking fairly seriously. Scoopy can read everyone's mind. Yeah? So talented. What is it? What is it you plan to have me do? Shadowgale asked. It's no great labor, and neither is it dangerous. It will just take some effort. For this first step of your task, go up that rope ladder, if you would. As per Flea's instructions, Shadowgale climbed the ladder. It led to the next area. Going up and down the ladder with the added burden of a second person was a rough task. You'd have to be fairly strong, or you'd likely either drop your passenger or fall. Only today, Shadowgale had to do it a number of times. It's a good thing I'm a magical girl, she thought, and then she realized, but then it's precisely because I'm a magical girl that I'm being worked like a dog. Meow. After they climbed the rope ladder and crawled out of the hole, all around them was a great body of water, without a single ripple to be seen on its surface. To their right was a ledge, and to the left a rock wall. Both of them looked natural, seemingly untouched. Within this space was the massive underground lake, about half a mile in diameter, and the hole led to its shore. It was over 30 feet up to the ceiling, which was bristled with stalactites. The cavern's width aside, it wasn't nearly as tall as the cavern below. The whole area was green, and the lake was a faint blue. It was colder than below and filled with clear, refreshing air. These were the sights intended for powerful words like sublime or mystical. The detail of this space was rather excessive and elaborate for just a path to connect the two areas. Shadowgale was mildly impressed, but she couldn't handle any more griping about her sentimentality, so she didn't let it show on her face as she walked along. Fortunately, no monsters appeared. Was that because the gate that separated the areas was close by? The boulders here were mossy, perhaps because of moisture from the lake, so she had to pay attention as she walked, or she'd have been at even more risk of slipping than they had been back at those caves in the subterranean area. It seemed to Shadowgale that the water in the lake was somewhat on the clearer side, but she couldn't actually tell what was in its depths. She took the widest possible detour around it, keeping one hand on the wall. Once she'd gone halfway around the lake, she came to a place on the left side where the rock wall was hollowed out. It was the only spot on this floor that looked to have a human touch. There were stairs carved out here, leading up. Shadowgale was forced to climb the whole flight. She ascended over 100 yards to reach a thick wooden door, and upon opening that, they finally arrived in the next area. This area was a library. The endless lines of shelves packed with books continued off toward the horizon. It was the same in the other direction. Wasteland, grasslands, mountains, a city, a subterranean area, and now, for some reason, a library. Shadowgale lowered Flea onto a chair at a table and then sat down across from her. Finally at ease, she looked around. This place had three things in common with the subterranean area. It smelled like mold, it was dreary, and there was no sunlight. The chairs made her butt sore if she sat on them for too long. The long tables seemed like they would break if they took a hit, and the floorboards would probably come loose if you ran on them. They creaked whenever she just walked across. Looking up at the ceiling, she saw panels were nailed onto it at a diagonal, probably an attempt at simulating shoddy repairs. Those same repair sites were lined up perfectly at regular intervals, very much like a video game. This would make it the second time they had come to the library area, but no matter how many times they did, the dust was suffocating. When they'd first arrived here, Flea had cried, "Amazing!" and taken a book in hand. But then she had discovered that the books were nothing but covers, just blank paper inside. She made certain they were only genuine, pure white paper, even when soaked in water, dripped with chemicals, held over a candle or sniffed, and Flea had not even touched the volume since. "Then let's check some things," said Flea. "Put up the item encyclopedia. It's convenient how it records any items the other parties buy. Check which items are purchasable at this area's shop. A magic carpet. It would fly just as promised. It could carry most the weight of an adult man, and the fastest it could go was an adult man's running speed. This game was big, though each area did differ in size. The largest of the levels, the wasteland, had to be almost 200 miles from end to end. Ultimately, the magical girls typically got around by running, so a vehicle that could only go as fast as a running man was unnecessary. Aside from Flea, who had lost her wheelchair, none of the other magical girls would need it. The holy charms. These were the same category as the charms sold in the subterranean area. It endowed the one who equipped it with holy elemental defense, which lessened the damage done by demonic monsters, and similarly also raised the magical girl's attack power against them. According to the bestiary, monsters like fiends and wraiths spawned in the library area, so these would be important items. The weapon +7. Of course, it was the evolution of the weapon +5. They were easier to use, sturdier, and more powerful than the +5 weapons, but they were insanely expensive. So expensive you had to beat 100 normal dragons to buy one. Many of the players had spent almost all the magical candy in their possession to get a hold of one of these. Shield +7. Some of the girls prioritized purchasing this over the weapon. Aside from those magical girls who had an aptitude for shields, or actually that was just clan tale. So far, none of them had been equipping them as a matter of course. Why? Because they weren't beautiful. Large bore shields didn't suit the kitschy, lovable charm of magical girls. Part of being a magical girl was being inefficient at times, even wearing things that got in the way and made it difficult to move, but always being cute nonetheless. But now they all knew they could no longer afford to hold on to that doctrine. If they wanted to block their enemies' attacks, the shields worked, and they would help the girls survive. Flea scrolled through the item encyclopedia. That's it for the items purchased at the shop. Next for the items acquired through R. R gave you a random item and cost 100 candy each time. For such a price, the item acquired was nearly always a map that sold for 3 candy, and they never seemed to get any other items. Each time Flea and Shadowgale had won rewards for finishing quests and things, they had bought a few R and acquired a number of items that were not maps. A toothbrush set, a very normal cup and toothbrush with toothpaste too. A rubber bow and arrow. It was just a toy. It would stick to whatever it hit with a thunk. Rope for mountain climbing. It was 100 feet long. They're all just regular items, Flea had said, and she was right. All they ever got were items that seemed unlikely to help them finish the game. The maximum number for all these items was low. All they got was a bunch of ones. Of ones. These items were rare, but all qualified as everyday objects. Among the items that other parties had won were a pot, utensils, and a shovel, and from what they could tell from the descriptions, they were all just mundane goods. There were still a number of blank spots on the R item list, but they were probably just as ordinary. But this seems interesting, Lee said. The initial location switch device. It was one of the applications. You could choose one area from all those available for the players to appear at when they logged into the game. In other words, you could choose which area of the game to start from. It was worth the time saved and running around at least. Just like the travel passes in the map, it was shared among the party. I suppose it does, said Shadowgale. The initial location switch device seemed to be unspectacular, though useful in its own right. But no, it really wasn't glamorous. It could save them time, but only once every 3 days. Lee scrolled through the item list to the end, where the reward for completing the unlock mission was displayed. The Dragon Shield, the Great Dragon's drop item, equivalent to a shield plus 12. Shadowgale recalled how, immediately before challenging the Great Dragon, Lee had been oddly fixated on the reward. She'd grumbled about wanting to keep all the candy and real money to herself, but had been unable to get the others to agree to that, and ultimately had ended up with only the drop item, while they had split the candy and cash evenly. Shadowgale knew Flea, Kanoe Hidokoji. From her view, that was incredibly suspicious. Kanoe would not be so attached to the candy, and neither would she have been all that concerned about a mere $1,000,000 yen. Most likely she had truly coveted that drop item and arranged it so that she would naturally receive it. Conway was very good at pulling off little tricks like that. This item will be key, said Flea. I'm sure. It was 5+ modifications higher than the shields that could be bought by throwing away every candy in your wallet. Considering how powerful the Great Dragon had been, Shadowgale wouldn't be surprised to hear this was the strongest shield in the game. Now then, as to our strategy moving forward. First, can I ask a question? Shadowgale interjected. Leah's modus operandi was to just do whatever she wanted and then explain everything afterward, partially to brag. If Shadowgale wanted to ask anything, she'd had to do it now, or she'd be forced to listen to the whole story once it was over, seasoned with a dose of boasting. Lee raised her right eyebrow halfway and offered her right hand, palm up, to say, Go ahead. Maybe Meow Meow was the traitor, after all. Or at the very least, Genopsycho must have thought so. If that were true, Genopsycho wouldn't have had to die herself. Do you think differently, miss? Regardless of Genopsycho's intentions. Lee placed her magical phone on top of the desk and launched the item encyclopedia. After a few swipes, it displayed the Miracle Coin's item description. The number of this item in circulation was at 1-1. It wasn't Meow Meow who stole the Miracle Coin. Her talismans had been burned up, and her magical phone is now unusable. If she'd stolen the coin, then the circulation number would have returned to 0. In other words, that meant that the one who'd killed Masked Wonder was still shamelessly participating in the game. Can I ask one more thing? Asked Shadowgale. What is it? Was it necessary to gather so many people in order to defeat the Great Dragon? Shadowgale placed her hands in her lap, leaning forward a bit as she looked at Flea. Flea put her right elbow on the table, resting her cheek on her hand as she looked back at Shadowgale. This was Flea, calm, collected, and brimming with confidence. Even just after surviving nearly certain death, she was perfectly composed. Have you forgotten what a terrible struggle that was? It was only by mustering all our forces that we were finally able to defeat it. Shadowgale wouldn't deny that it had been a desperate struggle. It wouldn't have surprised her if even more of them had died aside from Meow Meow and Genopsycho, but still she wondered if those numbers had been necessary. Shadowgale had thought of a way to complete the mission with fewer people, and more safely, though it had been after they'd already beaten the great dragon. Flea would have probably come up with the same idea. Besides, Flea's attitude was strange. Back in elementary school, Flea had been hit in the face with a dodgeball, and it had given her a nosebleed. Even then, she'd maintain a calm expression and said, The rules are that face hits don't count, right? Oh, Drapesy, thank you so much for the raid. Welcome. And just the other day, though Flea had made every preparation to challenge Churnamouse, she had lost the duel and her magical wheelchair to boot. Still, she was calm enough to compliment her opponent. That magic is amazing! As Shadowgale carried her on her back. Even when Flea, Conaway, failed, she would never scramble to save face. She would act as if it hadn't been a failure, and everyone would be fooled into thinking that she'd never really screwed up. That battle against the great dragon had been a near failure. They'd accomplished their goal and defeated the dragon, but they had let Genocycle's suicide attack happen, and Meow Meow had ultimately died for nothing. Flea didn't bring it up, but Shadowgale felt this reaction was different from her usual show of courage, pretension, and stubborn pride. Shadowgale couldn't put her feelings into words, but something just felt wrong to her. It was unsettling. Wait. Oh no, the TTS didn't go off, because I don't have the TTS on this screen. 1 second. Can I, move this over? How do I do this? Been meaning to add this to our other pages, or sources. Let me try this. I can also copy and paste so you don't have to use up your points. Let's see if this works. Oh, whoops.
Hi, I'm Justin and I'm friends with Meadow.
There we go. That was so sweet. Thank you. Let's see. Where was
Anyway, good night, Cephal 5, Meadow.
it? Good night, Wastelander. Have a wonderful night. This might be a little further back than I need to go, but I'd rather reread something I already read than not read something. Even when Flea, Conaway, failed, she would never scramble to save face. She would act as if it hadn't been a failure, and everyone would be fooled into thinking that she'd never really screwed up. The battle against the great dragon had been a near failure. They'd accomplished their goal and defeated the dragon, but they had let Genocycle's suicide attack happen, and Meow Meow had ultimately died for nothing. Flea didn't bring it up, but Shadowgale felt this reaction was different from her usual show of courage, pretension, and stubborn pride. Shadowgale couldn't put her feelings into words, but something just felt wrong to her. It was unsettling. Shadowgale thought Flea had been expecting something, hadn't she? Even if what had happened to Meow Meow and Genocycle was not the result of Flea's actions, she'd still gathered all of the magical girls together, anticipating that someone would take action, and created an ideal situation for that to happen. Flea had said that in order to find the culprit, she would examine their characters. If one of them caused an incident, it would be important information for her. Flea had lured that person into action, telling them to just give it a shot, in pursuit of that major piece of intelligence. She'd done exactly the same thing once already, when she'd revealed in front of the whole crowd that Masked Wonder had been murdered. That wasn't an announcement that should be made right in the middle of such chaos, was it? Wouldn't it have been better to wait until they all calmed down? She'd chosen that moment to drop the bomb, knowing that it would rile them up, or rather, so she could see their reactions when they were riled up. If Shadowgale was right, then Flea was part of the reason Meow Meow had died. Only a villain would think of causing an uproar in order to see everyone's reactions. Or even if you did think it, you wouldn't go and carry it out. But Flea was a villain. Shadowgale believed she was capable of it. Once again, Shadowgale scrutinized Flea. She was the same as ever, and Shadowgale couldn't read her face. Seemingly indifferent to Shadowgale's inner thoughts, Flea suddenly opened her mouth.
I've come up with an idea.
What is it?
Let's disband our party.
Shadowgale's hands nearly slid off her lap. She tensed them and peered at Flea. Flea was resting her cheek on her hand, smiling in enjoyment.
Petchka.
The next level, closed to them for so long, was the library area. It didn't make any sense at all that the level following the damp subterranean area would be a moisture-abhorring library. Though there hadn't been any rhyme or reason to the order of the area so far, wasteland, grasslands, mountains, city, and then underground. Violence was unsuited to libraries. They were founded on a desire for knowledge, wisdom, or other vocabulary associated with learning. It seemed obvious to Petchka that fighting, the antithesis of those values, would be inappropriate in such a place. You could say that even running down the hallways was a seat of violence. Clantail in the library area did not get along at all. The place smelled old, moldy, and dusty, and the briefest scuttle sent thick clouds of dust into the air. The place was run down, too, dilapidated. Running around with a deer body made it too easy to kick through the floor, so ever since they'd come to the library, she'd transformed into smaller animals in order to fight. At first, she'd gone with a deer or pony, but then, once she figured out that four-legged creatures weren't good for fighting within a confined space, she generally been taking the form of a largish ape. You'd think an ape would be more human-like than a four-legged animal, but still, a beast is a beast, and the humanness of it just made Clantail especially frightening.
She really is cutest as a deer or a pony, thought Petchka.
The library area had some unique features that hadn't been present in the previous area. One had to do with the monster's traits, while the other was a feature of the area itself. Nonoko Miyokata's dragon charged, sending black mist flying in all directions. A devil took the shape of a lion to attack Petchka, who jerked up her shield +7. After she blocked 3 strikes, she rushed over to sit down in a chair. When the lion saw Petchka in the chair, it stopped attacking. Clantail took advantage of this moment to thrust her spear straight through a bookshelf toward it. The lion somehow managed to dodge, and Clantail's spear tore open its shoulder instead. But when the great ape, forming Clantail's lower body, attacked with another spear, the lion couldn't dodge, and she skewered its torso. It spasmed a few times and disintegrated. Rianetta stretched her arm joints to their limits to splice apart a devil flying through the air, and when the scattered remains of the wraith Nonoko's dragon had attacked attempted to rematerialize, Nonoko herself stabbed it with her streamer, trailing ritual staff to finish it off. The library area featured a great variety of monsters, or so they had been led to believe at first, but when they checked the monster encyclopedia, they found that was not the case. There were only 3 types of monsters in the library area. The reason they had misunderstood was because these enemies could change shape. The base form of one of these monsters looked like a pitch-black angel cut and kneaded from darkness itself. They were called demons and devils, and they transformed into a variety of different animals: lions, leopards, hippos, and elephants, too, and even the dragons they fought underground before. Their animal forms were not that threatening in and of themselves. Even Petchka could knock down an angry beast if she put her mind to it. Magical girls were faster, stronger, and tougher than wild animals. The issue was not that they could transform into beasts, but that they were also fast, strong, and tough enough to be able to match magical girls in a fight while also transforming at will to adapt to the situation. Only with the Holy Charm, which increased elemental attack and defense, expensive equipment with the +7 modifier, and some cooperation, were they finally able to get the upper hand against these foes. The names Demon and Devil indicated two distinct monster types, but they couldn't be differentiated at a glance. They dropped the same number of candies and had the same ability to shapeshift too. The first one to notice the distinguishing feature was Nonoko Miyokata.
Oh, if you look closely, you see the hairstyles are different.
The demon's hair flipped up inward, the devil's hair flipped outward. Their entire bodies were black, so it wasn't really hair so much as the hair-like part, though. There was hard to differentiate, and then there was this. Aside from the demons and devils, there were also wraiths. These were hazy in form, like black mist, and upon closer inspection, one could pick out a faint feminine shape. Punches and kicks would only go through them inefficiently. They could pass right through everything, not just the girls' attacks: floor, ceiling, tables, and bookshelves. But in spite of this, their attacks were solid and painful when they attacked. These enemies were unfair, attacking without letting their opponent strike back, or they would have been without the holy charms. Equipping a holy charm enabled physical contact with the wraiths, making it possible to damage them. Sound and light could also hurt them, but no one in their group had any moves like that, so they used an uncomplicated method of attack. With the holy charms, they could leave the wraiths to Nonoko's pet dragon, since they weren't that strong, while the magical girls would go for the devils and demons. Petchka focused on defense. This became their basic strategy for the library area. The most notable feature of the library area was that it had safe spots. To be precise, no one was sitting on the chairs within the building would be attacked by the enemies. If you sat down on a chair when things got dangerous, the monsters would stop their onslaught. For a magical girl who wasn't all that good at fighting, it was a welcome option. Checking to see if there was a chair in the area before each fight as they explored became habitual, not only to Petchka, but to all of them. It was also nice that, unlike in the other areas so far, they could have a calm meal here. As long as they sat politely in chairs, they could relax and devote themselves to eating. Petchka got the pot out and filled it with a stack of stones and rocks from the subterranean area and rested her palms on them for 5 minutes to transform them into a delicious meal. The menu for today was hashed beef.
Like that thing, Dice, that demon. It was just like Clantail, how it transforms and stuff,
Nonoko said, still chewing. That was not an observation Petchka would ever give voice to, even if she was thinking it. When she silently looked over at Clantail, she saw the other girl wordlessly spooning food into her mouth. Currently, Clantail was a girl's upper body attached to the body of an ape, where the neck would be. She was frighteningly tall, even more so than when she was part horse. She came off that much more intimidating. Generally, when they were eating, the smell circulated as the same height as the food. With Clantail towering above the rest of them, it disturbed the aromatic current where she sat, and somehow this bothered Petchka. She couldn't help but be concerned about the smell of the food she'd made.
When I first saw you, Clantail, I thought, oh, I have to make that my bébé. I was even disappointed when I found out you were a magical girl. It's the same with that demon, Sice.
It was pretty rude to be saying that she was just like a demon, wasn't it? And Rianetta didn't scold Nonoka for it either. She was enthusiastically devouring her hashed beef. Apprehensively, Petchka looked at Clantail. She couldn't see any emotional reaction. The ape, lacking any part equivalent to a horse's tail, just sat solidly with its hands on its knees. Clantail had set 2 chairs side by side and placed her large ape rear on both, but they still looked like they might collapse at any moment.
Oh, thank you, Noelle.
It's very kind of you. I love doing these readings with our headmates.
The demons can transform into animal, so I thought it could be my friend, but no. These monsters are a disappointment.
Beside Nonoko, her dragon was scarfing down its hashed beef atop a line of 3 chairs. Entirely focused on its food, it showed no concern at all for the implication that if its master had been able to make friends with a demon, the dragon would have been doomed to dismissal. Like the dragon, Clantail, having been treated much like a monster, showed no sign of anger or upset, and wordlessly finished her hashed beef before she laid down her spoon and pressed her hands together. Thank you for the food.
It was delicious! They're amazing, Petchka. This is the reason I can keep a stiff upper lip through all these stinky, sweaty battles,
said Rianetta. Petchka smiled shyly in response to her party's praise, tugging on the decorative feather on her hat. No matter how many times these compliments raised her spirits, she couldn't get used to it. Their meal ended, and when they were about to head out for more grinding, their magical phones rang with an alert. An event is now occurring. Players, please gather in the Wasteland Town Square. Petchka felt oddly chipper. Rianetta's sharp tongue had stopped just short of causing a serious fight. Nonoko was cheerful, and Clantail didn't seem to be annoyed. That may only have been because she didn't have any hooves to tap to express her irritation, but Petchka doubted it. It had been a shock when Genosaiko Yumenoshima took Meow Meow down with her in the Great Dragon's Cavern, but considering the reasons it had happened and reaching a conclusion had lessened the impact. Petchka had heard that earlier Genosaiko had come to detect Bell's party and left them with a note hinting at the existence of a traitor. Next, Genosaiko had taken Meow Meow down with her to be burned up in the dragon's flames. Logically, her motives would point to Meow Meow being the traitor and Genosaiko punishing her for it, right? They were being forced to play a game where one wrong move would spell their deaths. That fact had not changed, but Petchka felt less anxious, in spite of this, because the one recognized to be the traitor had been eliminated. The monsters in the library weren't that strong, and dropped relatively large sums of candy, and it seemed that the next level would be the location of the final battle. They'd discovered a message in the library area that read, "The Evil King's Castle is next." Since it was called the Evil King's Castle, their ultimate foe had to be there. And if the Evil King was there, it would be the final level, since the goal of this game was to beat him. It made Petchka feel better to know that their objective was close. Having a goal in sight enabled her to enjoy the marathon more than she would if she was unsure how far they had left to run. The pre-maintenance event in the Wasteland Town Square was not a cruel and unusual one, such as whoever has the fewest magical candies dies, but rather a light, peaceful, typical one. It was a rock, paper, scissors tournament among all the girls, and the winner would receive 1,000 magical candy. No matter who you were, 1,000 was nothing to sneeze at. You'd have to defeat 10 demons to gather up that much.
I'm sure you've all noticed, but from this area on, the items sold in shops will all be expensive, Plum. You often won't have enough candy for the items you want, Plum. Furthermore, some items will have only 1 or 2 in circulation, so there won't be that many, Plum. Please try to earn a little more candy to acquire the items you want ahead of the other players, Plum.
Paul said all at once before taking a big breath.
Though I think it would be best if you could decide who gets which items through peaceful conversation,
At the end of a fierce and even contest with Lazaline, Flea won the rock, paper, scissors tournament.
Sounds as if there would be a shop in the Evil King's castle as well,
said Rionetta.
And I'll be selling some pretty expensive items too. Let's leave one of Clantail's spears as a +5 then. If there are weapons with even more plus modifications on sale in the next area, it will be a major financial loss.
Said Petchka.
Once the next area is unlocked, it might be best to look for the town as soon as possible, huh?
Indeed, Rionetta agreed.
You've heard what Fall said. Whoever buys items first is victorious, it seems.
As Petchka discussed the upcoming area with her party, she glanced around at the other groups. Shadowgale was rushing out of the square, while Flea, sitting on a magic carpet, watched her go. It seemed that the two of them were going to be working separately. At some point, Melville had disappeared. Was she acting solo? Detective Bell called out to Flea, and the two of them clustered together with Lapis Lazuli and Noko, discussing something. Since Meow Meow and Genopsycho were dead, Noko was without a party, and it looked like she'd be joining up with them. Petchka wasn't in a position to be worried about anyone else, but she'd been concerned about Noko, so she was relieved that another party would take her in. Noko was the kind of girl you wanted to protect when you looked at her. The effect was so strong that even Petchka felt that way toward her. Noko was all alone, fidgeting and needy, or so it seemed. If there was another group that would take her in, that was for the best. Petchka breathed a sigh of relief. But with Flea, Lazaline, Detectbell, and Noko all together, didn't that mean Shadowgale was not just off doing something else, but rather entirely out of the party? It seemed that there had been some reorganization going on while Petchka's attention had been elsewhere. She shifted her gaze back to her own group. Rionetta and Nonoko Miyokata were talking, and Clantail was nodding. Theirs was the only party that had remained the same since the start of the game. Petchka felt her logic was selfish, but the death of someone she had hardly spoken with would be totally different from the death of one of the party members she'd been working with to complete the game. Though she'd gotten off on the wrong foot with them, they were all friends now, and they were important to her. She didn't want Clantail, Rionetta, or Nonoko Miyokata to die. Petchka pressed her thumb into her palm and squeezed it tight. Drink of water. Okay, Noko. Returning from the game to real life, Noriko resumed her daily routine. Though it was the same 3-day span, it didn't feel like it at all. Noriko came home from school and immediately dropped her backpack there before she went straight to the hospital. She could have gone from school to the hospital, but if she were wearing her backpack, her mother would look unhappy. It was more efficient to leave her backpack at home, get her mother a change of clothes, some basic items, money, and other necessities, and take those to the hospital with her. On her way there, if Noriko saw gloomy people on the street or at the hospital, she would use her magic on them. Fundamentally speaking, in order for a magical girl to use her powers, she would have to be transformed. In other words, you couldn't use magic as a part of your day-to-day routine. But Noriko knew how to make practical use of magic in her daily life. Most likely, this method was only available to her right now. Noko looked about 10 years old, and Noriko's real age was also 10 years old. Not only were the two close in age, Noko also looked a lot like Noriko. Of course, they weren't exactly the same. To make it work, she obviously had to wear her normal clothes, change her hairstyle, dye it black, and use little tricks with accessories and her facial expressions. What's more, she fervently believed that she was Noko no Nohara. She could use Noko's magic to transmit that belief to everyone around her. All of this made it possible to go about her day transformed into a magical girl so that she could use her powers easily, even in class or while walking home. Noriko was still growing, so she didn't know how long she could keep doing this, but still, she'd use it as long as she was able. Using magic on a daily basis meant that her powers got much more of a workout than most. It was basically like training. The essence of a magical girl's powers stays the same for her whole life, but in a general way, she could become more proficient with practice. She could activate her abilities faster, and they'd become more effective and have greater range. The area of effect would broaden, and she'd become able to do things that had been impossible for her previously. You couldn't rest on your laurels after becoming a magical girl. That was just the beginning. Noko was grateful to that older girl who had once told her that, though she had long since joined the roster of the dead. Her words lived on within Noko. Using magic repeatedly as a part of her daily life was part of her training. Noko had heard of cases where a girl's magic would grow suddenly, stimulated by powerful emotion. But though some might yearn for a life like something out of a shonen manga, it was beyond her reach to realize that. Striving for growth. There's cats meowing on my stream and outside my stream. What's up, buddy? Buddy. It's so loud. Oh. Striving for growth through diligent daily effort, little by little, like building up a stack of rocks, suited Noko better. Meow. Oh, he knocked my water bottle over. As might be expected from a medical facility that boasted the status of best in the prefecture, this hospital really was large. It didn't have just food stands on its premises, but also convenience stores. Not only did it have things like barbershops and full-scale restaurants, Noko had been shocked to find out it even had a store for consumer electronics, a bookstore, and a Western-style candy shop. She'd eaten cake with her mother on the hospital terrace once, some type with a name so long she couldn't remember it. It had been written in French, too. She greeted the doctors, nurses, and patients with smiles, occasionally using her magic, until she knocked on the door to her mother's hospital room. When her mother replied, "Come in," Noriko opened it. Her mother's examination was done by this time, and she was back in her room, about 15 pages into her paperback. Noriko told her mother about her day at school, making it sound as fun as she could, and took out an apple, swiftly peeling it. Noriko had taken over the house chores 2.5 years ago, so this task was simple for her.
"Listen, Noriko,"
said her mother.
"What? If you ever have any problems, tell me about it, all right?"
The hand holding the knife reflexively stopped. Noriko looked back at her mother. She'd recovered quite a bit compared to when she'd been sickest, and her cheeks were beginning to fill out again. But she was still worse than at the start of her illness, and it made her eyes seem especially large. They were looking intently at Noriko.
"Yeah, if anything happened, I'd tell you. If there was anything."
Implicitly, Noriko was saying,
"Nothing is wrong."
Her mother was just staring at her. Noriko thought back on all she'd done since she came into the room. Had she been different from usual? Could anything about her have made her mother worry? She might have been acting a little too bubbly. Maybe that ended up being suspicious. She examined herself and zealously called to mind enjoyable things, transmitting those feelings to her mother in an attempt to dispel her concerns. As long as she had fun things, as long as she had happy things, she would be okay. She didn't want to make her mother worry about her. She cheerfully bade her mother farewell and then walked down the hallway, the taps of her feet on the linoleum sounding as she thought. Clearly, she was in a dangerous situation right now, but she couldn't tell her mother about any of it. She wouldn't make her worry anymore. Noriko got the feeling that she understood the reason why her master had added this maintenance period for 3 days in a row when they would be returned to reality. By forcing them to alternate between their normal lives and the game, the master was trying to make them more attached to life. They couldn't just forget their normal lives as the days in the game rolled by, then go off and sacrifice themselves heroically or something. They couldn't help but recall how they valued their lives and the people close to them. But even so, Genocycle had died and taken Meow Meow down with her. Noriko couldn't understand what she had been trying to do. And considering what she'd first seen of Genocycle's character and disposition, it didn't feel right. Would she have chosen to die like that? Noko's magic acted on people's hearts. She had always worked with people's emotional cores, paying very close attention to what made them unique, always observing and analyzing everyone around her. Even in the game, she had continued to do that. The surface personality that Genocycle had shown them had been the cheerful and fun, dirty type. From what Noriko could tell, she'd kept hidden a seed of arrogance. She was laid back, possibly to the point of being irresponsible and careless. Being absolutely safe within her suit, she had said things that seemed somewhat egotistical to Noko. She was safe, so she wasn't all that fussed about crisis, and that had been what had led to her injury. This wasn't the portrait of a person who would push up her visor and leap straight into certain death. Genocycle's personality was defined by her safety. Her idiosyncrasies were built on the fact that she was absolutely untouchable. Had the samurai girl changed her personality when she cut her up, even though her visor was down, and destroyed that security? Noriko reflected on her own circumstances. She'd once been
be no compromises or concessions at all. I'm not changing my mind, and if you won't go with that, then you're giving me no reason at all to release the children.
We can't negotiate if that's the case.
Magical girls are chosen by the gods. We can't have even a smidgen of any impurity among us.
She was smiling. She said the words. The magical girl in white intently examined that expression. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Then, without a word, she stood, pushed the folding chair aside, and turned away from the other girl. The magical phone lying on the table turned on.
Snow White, there's no time, Pum. 6 of them are dead already, Pum. Please hurry and...
The mastermind slammed her right fist down on the magical phone to turn it off, and the shrill, synthetic voice coming from the device cut out.
I'll say it one more time. You'll understand.
We will continue negotiations. Her back still turned. The white magical girl spoke quietly. So don't kill anymore.
What?
With her pointer finger, the first girl adjusted her glasses as they slipped down her face, and her lips twisted.
I haven't killed anyone, you know. That thing with Magical Daisy was, well, an unfortunate accident. But once I gathered them together to make them play the game, they just started going right ahead and killing one another. I never told them to, you know. In fact, the rules make it so that they can cooperate. I've given them proper hints about it, too. I've never cheated anywhere. I made this game so that a good, legitimate magical girl will be able to complete it. I'm a kind game master for giving the children a chance for re-examination. I mean, they all became magical girls through the wrong method, and properly speaking, they should have been removed without question, right?
The magical girl in white did not reply, putting her hand on the doorknob. The other girl yelled after her.
You tried to read my mind, didn't you? Did you think that I might have some weakness? Is that why you came here? I'm telling you, I have no weaknesses. Here, I'm invincible. I can do anything, and nothing you do will work. I'm just like a god. One of the other girls from your time was named Nemurine, right? My thing is similar to hers. As long as I'm in this world, nobody can touch me. I have no weaknesses. That's why, even if you do read my mind, it won't bother me at all.
It was neither a lie nor exaggeration that she was invincible as long as she was in this world. If you killed her, she wouldn't die, though you couldn't even kill her in the first place. And she could do anything.
This is actually a private place, just for me, but I invited you in, especially Snow White, because I want to make friends with you.
The magical girl in white said nothing in reply to the other girl's patronizing remarks, leaving the room and closing the door softly, the lines of light peering in from beyond the door, narrowed bit by bit, and finally disappeared. The girl, though she was now alone, continued to babble on and on. I've got nothing to be ashamed of. I'm just saying what I believe is right and actualizing how I think things should be. That's why I can let you read everything in my head. If you've seen what's in there, then you must understand, right, Snow White? You and me, we can cooperate. We should cooperate, you know? After all, we're both the right kind of magical girl. All right. I will continue in a moment. But first, I want to refill my water bottle. And I'll get that image down. I'll be back in just a minute. So, I'm back. We're on Chapter 7, Lazaline's Dream. Petchka. Petchka was looking at her new deposit of 100,000 yen, but it didn't excite her like it had before. If someone were to come tell her she could quit the game for 1,000,000 yen, she would have canceled the time deposits with all her New Year's money in them and gone to her father and grandfather pleading, "Don't ask any questions, just trust me," to scrape together the sum. And though it wasn't like her, she might have even been willing to lie and say a bad man had deceived her and gotten her pregnant. She would be willing to raise money through her friends or use her magical girl powers to do it. Judging from what she recalled of her friends' reactions when they ate her food, she could charge for that at least. But these thoughts would never leave the realm of fantasy, because there was no kind benefactor who would allow her to quit the game if she paid 1,000,000 yen. Once during their exploration, Petchka had waited until she was alone and then summoned Fall to ask a question.
Do you mind if I ask something? What is it, Pong? What would happen if everyone refused to play? Basically, there's a punishment for any magical girl who abandons the game. The punishment in this case would be essentially that her heart would stop, Pong. If all of you arranged to quit at once, the whole thing would be deleted. So I'm told, Pong. What would happen then? You would drift in the cyberspace forever, never able to return to the real world, Pong. So I can't recommend it, Pong.
Petchka was crestfallen.
You're not the first one to ask that question, so don't be too discouraged, Pong.
You die if you rage quit. Yeah. A game that kills you when you rage quit. The way Fall spoke with sympathy somehow made Petchka angry, and she switched off her magical phone. All their exits had been cut off. They couldn't abandon the game or challenge the master, and they still couldn't send any messages to the magical kingdom. They'd also all been reminded that they'd be killed if they told anyone, so they couldn't seek help either. They had no choice but to head in the direction indicated by the very person who had dragged them into this game. Sorry. The master. That was it. Their one sliver of hope, completing the game. The end was getting close. The next area would be the evil king's castle, and Petchka's party had saved their candy while doing a good job of steadily upgrading their equipment. They'd become quite accustomed to the game's battles, and even Petchka was now competent enough when it came to pure defense with a shield. If they could just finish the game, it would all be over. If they could just get through this, everything would get better. Petchka prayed for them to remain safe. Until then, at least, when she pressed her hands together before her home altar like she always did. She went to school and gave Ninomiya his lunch after school in the park. To Chika, her 3 days of solace flew by like an arrow. She wanted to experience them slowly, make them last just a bit longer, but time would not stop. She chatted with Ninomiya, sitting alongside him on the park bench lit by the setting sun. He talked about how his coach had instructed him to be more of a team player. He seemed to be reflecting on this, acknowledging that perhaps it was true he often went off on his own and did whatever he wanted, and that he should put in his own best effort while also striving work together with his team. A typical boy of Ninomiya's age would probably feel resentful after such a scolding from a teacher or a parent and wouldn't repent like that. Perhaps it wasn't just Ninomiya's talent that was bringing him success in baseball, but also his humility. Chika had thought someone often called a genius would be arrogant and self-centered, but maybe that had just been her assumption. On the other hand, what about herself? Even if she hadn't necessarily been selfish, it wasn't as if she had done everything she could for others. Once in the library area, a devil had attacked Clantail from behind while she was fighting off a demon. Petchka had felt like she had her hands full just defending herself, but she still should have been able to call out to her teammate at least.
Clantail, watch out! Or, there's one behind you!
Or something. It would have been enough just to yell something brief. Fortunately, Nonoko Miyokata had kicked the devil, and Clantail hadn't taken that hit, but she'd been lucky. Clantail could have died because of Petchka's inaction. Just thinking about it made her feel like something was gripping her stomach tight. Ninamiya told her how his coach had told him it was important to call out to people, and that because he hadn't done so, they'd let a fly ball become a blooper, and the coach had been mad about it for the whole day. Recalling his coach's fury, Ninamiya hugged his arms close, frowning a little, as if he were cold. That idea that it was important to call out to people would be applied just as well to Petchka. If she had called out to Clantail, there would have been no problem. If it happened again, she wouldn't just defend herself. She'd watch out for her allies too. If they were in danger, she'd let them know. If it seemed like even shouting wouldn't make it in time, though the idea was horribly frightening to her, she would try to body slam them with her shield up at least. As long as she didn't freeze up in fear, she'd do her best. Ignorant of Petchka's contemplation, Ninamiya talked about how the pitching machine had broken recently. It was now dim in the park, and no more people were walking the streets. The tortoiseshell cat meowed from where it lay on top of the slide. They put Opal, Eo's cat, into this book. I almost said game. Detect Bell. Silver grass swayed in the wind. Willows stood in orderly lines along the sidewalk in front of the station. The road was even named simply Willow Street. At the edge of these roadside trees was this long patch of fluttering silver grass. Nobody had planted it. Had the seeds floated in from somewhere then? And if so, why hadn't it been cut before it had gotten this tall? Just the sight of the silver grass brought these questions to mind, but all the people on the street passed it right by. Not a single one stopped. They had enough on their plates worrying about themselves, so they weren't going to consider the grass. Even Detect Bell, who was getting sentimental as she watched the silver patch in the autumn dusk, would normally have been entirely occupied with her own business. Since Churnamouse had died, Melville had left their party, and they had welcomed in the lonely Noko, as well as Flea after she'd apparently split with Shadowgale due to a fight. So once again, Detect Bell was in a party of 4. But though they'd regained their former numbers, they weren't as powerful in battle as they once had been. The new members didn't make up for the loss of Churnamouse and her overwhelming size, and Melville, master of the bow and wielder of camouflage magic. Noko wasn't the battle-oriented type, and Flea was even worse now that she'd lost her wheelchair and was using the magic carpet to get around. Detect Bell had never been all that great at fighting to begin with either. A detective only needed enough skill in martial arts to be able to keep up with crooks and didn't pursue any extraneous abilities beyond that. She hadn't done anything like specialized training to fight monsters. Inevitably, their party came to a focus on exploration rather than hunting. Flea gave instructions. Detect Bell used her magnifying glass and other detective tools to discover all the hidden messages and such. And when the time came to fight, Lizaline was their main force. Flea would swiftly back off to a safe location and give directions, while Noko would wield her mop and Detect Bell would hold the enemies at bay with her staff. Meanwhile, Lizaline would throw a gem, disappear, reappear, and vanquish again to confuse the enemies with her teleportation magic. She would kick, punch, pose, and drop one-liners like, "I am the blue flash that dances on the battlefield! Lapis Lazuli!" Until now, Lizaline had been overshadowed by Churnamouse and Melville, 2 of the strongest fighters among all the girls, but Lizaline was pretty strong and bold herself. In fact, during their battle with the Great Dragon as well, She'd been the one to jump in front of the flames without concern for the danger to protect Clantail, the key to their victory, and this had caused Lazaline to be the most heavily wounded of all of them. Lazaline herself had said,
"It was so hot and it hurt so bad. I thought I was gonna die."
But her tone was also light. She didn't see it as all that serious, nor did she boast of her contribution. Though Detect Bell had no desire to emulate Lazaline, she had to admit that throwing yourself so casually into danger was very much like a magical girl. But that casual and flippant attitude really did bother Detect Bell. Something deep in her heart whispered, "You can't trust her." She was driven by a hunch that she had to look into Lapis Lazuli. The city where Detect Bell worked as a detective and magical girl. The city was where Detect Bell worked as a detective and magical girl. The bustling and chaotic area was well known enough that everyone out in the country would have heard of it. People flocked here from within the city and without, giving her that much more work as both a detective and a magical girl. The area Detect Bell stood in now was much like her own home turf, but rather more specialized in certain regards. It was on the outskirts of Tokyo, in a place that had been a post town with a wealth of inns back in the Edo period. Just 3 steps from a certain JR station most people would recognize, you'd hit the red light district. Bright neon lights, the suffocating heat of bodies, and the grating din of the crowds made for a stunning atmosphere. The men's attire presented a wide variety in age, occupation, and class, but all of the women were scantily clad, even in the cold weather. Some were even wearing near translucent attire, with skirts as short as they could get. Even in such a materialistic and lively district, it seemed there were still old poets who left the silver grass by the roadside trees. It wasn't surprising that a magical girl, bundle of emotion that she was, would make this her haunt. This was Lapis Lazuline's home base, or so Detect Bell figured. With her girlish appearance, Detect Bell was bound to have a run-in with the law and get dragged to the station by some local cop. Furthermore, unlike the time Detect Bell had tracked down Magical Daisy, she couldn't let Lapis Lazuli catch sight of her in costume. Detect Bell continued her investigation, doing everything she could to keep her form as Shinobu Hyoka. But even as Shinobu Hyoka, she was still a young woman. In her long-sleeved casual shirt, a full jacket, and cotton pants, she looked like she was going out to the neighborhood discount store. Though she was dressed like a local, for a young woman walking around at this hour, it was clearly strange. Plus, her light makeup made her stick out like a sore thumb. She had no choice but to equip herself with clothes, makeup, and accessories from a department store in the next neighborhood over. But she didn't feel like her makeshift costume truly made her blend in among the professional girls. And she was cold from showing so much skin at this time of year, even with stockings on. Furthermore, even though she was just faking the look, men would occasionally approach her anyway, which made her investigation that much more troublesome. She'd managed to complete her investigation of Magical Daisy within 3 days, but she wouldn't be able to finish this one in that span of time. This led her to doubt her abilities as a detective, but she wasn't going to give up now. She'd gotten a clue. She just had to rely on it to push onward. Buildings' memories were different from human memories. They wouldn't disappear, fade, or become vague. Even if their tenants moved, their stores were renovated, or they were altered due to a change in fire alarm or emergency exit regulations, as long as the main bulk of structure was intact, it would always remember. Skirting some drunk's pile of vomit, Shinobu walked down a back street, surreptitiously transforming to kiss a wall in search of a building that might know Lapis Lazuli. Avoiding notice and being careful to stay out of sight was a common part of every one of a magical girl's activities. Detect Bell was quite familiar with it. Along the way, she witnessed a small pickup truck honking its horn as it ran through a pedestrian-only street jammed with people. The driver's hair looked like Charlie Brown's. His face was a bright red, and he had a beer can in one hand, while his other rested on the wheel. This sight, which might cause one to doubt their sanity, convinced her that yes, there was a lot of work for a magical girl to do in this neighborhood. She walked, and sometimes ran, in search of information. At first blush, a red light district and a magical girl seemed incongruous, but contrary to that perception, they were actually surprisingly compatible. Detective Bell knew this from experience. In any case, her feet pounded the pavement until she discovered a building that had managed to witness lapis lazuli during the last maintenance period. Though they had only a brief encounter when Lazuli jumped down onto its roof, what was important was that she'd found a clue at all. Following Lazuli's trail from the building, Shinobu discovered the roof of an office tower that lapis lazuli frequently used to rest, as well as a hostess club that had witnessed Lazuli switch back to human form. The people at the club said that she hadn't switched back to her human form inside, but out back in a dark alley that didn't see much traffic. When it informed Shinobu that Lazuli looked like a young girl, Shinobu's only thought was, well, that's no surprise. Buildings never forgot, but it was difficult to get human characteristics out of them. They could differentiate between people if you were to show them a photo, but asking for their characteristics in order to create a facial portrait would just be too difficult, Shinobu's artistic abilities aside. She poked into the cleavage of her thin dress with her index finger to pull out a golden chain with pocket watch on the end. A day and a half had passed since the second maintenance period had begun. She wanted to uncover Lazuli's identity before they returned to the game, if possible. She didn't have much time. She tucked her pocket watch back and exhaled a sigh. Her breath wasn't visible yet, but in this season, it would be no surprise for the weather to turn chilly the next day.
Huh?
Came a familiar voice, and Shinobu turned around. Even in the darkness, the blue of her dress was vivid. White over-the-knee socks emphasized her healthy thighs. Her cape was decorated with fluffy fur, and the pin holding it sparkled with a gem. The black and white striped tail that hung from her bottom twitched. Her glossy black hair was cut in an even line at her shoulders, and she had a tiny mole like a teardrop near her right eye. It wasn't that Shinobu hadn't imagined that she might, in the process of tracking down lapis lazuli, encounter the girl herself. She'd been even more secretive with her magic for that reason, taking care to avoid being found not only by regular people, but also by anyone else in her trade. To avoid standing out as much as possible, she had dressed herself in garish clothing and heavy makeup. There was no way she could have been noticed, but still.
You're Belle, right? Why are you out in a place like this?
Shinobu re-examined herself. She was clearly the human Shinobu Hyoka and not Detective Bell. But now that she'd taken a good look at herself, she couldn't explain her way out of this. Anyone who would look down at themselves after being addressed as Belle could be none other than pre-transformation Detective Bell Shinobu Hyoka. But still, she thought,
can't I come up with some kind of excuse? Can't I talk my way out of this somehow?
She couldn't come up with anything. Leslie clapped her hands in joy.
You're not from round here, are you, Belle? Traveling? Oh, but why would you be going on a trip now? Did you come out just to see me?
Shinobu hesitated, then slowly nodded.
For real? Awesome! You coming to hang out with me is the best surprise ever. Wait, how'd you know where I live? Oh, must be because you're a detective. You can do all that investigating stuff, can't you? Oh yeah, you did say you found out where Magical Daisy lived, huh? Pretty amazing stuff, Belle.
While Shinobu was busy thinking about how she would make it through this situation, Lazuline was working herself into a lather. Did she think that Shinobu could find magical girls without any evidence or hint just because she was a detective?
Well, since you came all the way here, I'll show you my place, said Lazuline.
Shinobu was startled. That had been her ultimate goal, but she hadn't imagined that Lapis Lazuli herself would invite her in. Lazuli closed her eyes, raised up a blue gem, and cried, "Lazuli mode off! Cancel transformation!" and struck a pose as she turned back into human form. There was no need to yell or anything when canceling a transformation, but that was very like Lazuli in Shinobu's opinion. "Then I'll show you the way! Follow me, Billy!" The girl was wearing a high school uniform, a blazer. She looked 16 or 17, but everything about her appearance was heavily made up. Her makeup wasn't like Shinobu's makeshift heavy look. It was properly done. Faint blue eyeshadow, red lips, mascara that was thick without being clumpy, and white cheeks. Her hair was a maroon-brown color, fashioned into a complicated braided updo. When Shinobu had been in high school, she had fashion-conscious classmates like that, and they had hung out with similar girls. She'd never exchanged any more words with them than necessary. All they had in common to talk about was school, and she'd figured that any conversation with them wouldn't be very interesting.
"Belle, what you doing? You're gonna get left behind!"
Shinobu dragged her feet behind the teenager in front of her. She couldn't figure out what this girl's goal was. She couldn't understand her train of thought either. What she did understand was that she was in a bad situation. From the back alley, they headed into a residential area. When they cut through a children's playground, the teenage girl deliberately walked along the seesaw, crossing over without falling as it tilted under her weight. She talked to a cat on a stroll atop a concrete wall, asking it,
"How you doing today?"
It meowed in reply, and she answered,
"That's pretty nice,"
before turning around and smiling at Shinobu. She was all dolled up, but she looked innocent at the same time. It didn't seem like she was trying to deceive Shinobu, and she didn't appear to be hiding anything. That alone sent shivers down Shinobu's spine.
"Over there,"
the teenager said, pointing at a line of apartment buildings. They were all 5 stories tall, each one assigned a number. Moonlight illuminated their white walls. They weren't fancy. They were typical for an older complex and very standard apartments. Her gait still playful, the girl indicated one of the buildings, marched through a lot containing a smattering of parked cars, and arrived at the entrance. It wasn't all that far from the red light district. It hadn't been more than a 10-minute walk from where she had found Shinobu behind that cabaret club. But in spite of that, it was quiet and dark, also cold. It struck a stark contrast with the heat and desire not so far away. Shinobu's footsteps sounded so loud to her, as did her breathing, and not just her own. She could also hear the cheerful inhalations of the girl in front of her. It was dark, and there was no sign of any people around. Just one step off the path, and Shinobu could probably get away. But even if she were to run now, she would eventually end up meeting Lazuli again in the game. The only difference was whether she'd be cross-examined now or later. Though this girl was supposedly going somewhere specific, her stride seemed whimsical somehow, perhaps because of her cat-like nature. She was the kind of stray you always had to keep an eye on. Despite the late hour, she ran up the stairs 3 at a time, not even considering that she should walk quietly. Shinobu just barely managed to keep up.
"Welcome to my castle,"
said the girl. There was no nameplate. The whole door was pretty old, and the keyhole and hinges corroded by red rust, but it opened and closed smoothly. Had it been oiled then? The inside of the apartment was neater than Shinobu might have expected, or rather, there just wasn't anything in there. The girl went down a hall and guided her to a room, where she set out a soft cloth object, some kind of throw pillow or floor cushion. Her host ran off again, feet tapping on the hall floor, and Shinobu was left alone. It didn't look like she was in the living room. This was probably Lazuline's bedroom, but there was little sign that anyone occupied it. The room was fairly small and featured one big traditional style chest of drawers, and that was all. The lone furnishing took up about a third of the unusable space in the room. Looking around where she sat, Shinobu found nothing else. She stood up to look at the top of the chest of drawers and saw a photo stand. She was stretching up to reach out to the photo when the sliding door was smacked open.
Sorry for the wait!
The girl carried 2 cups filled with black liquid in her right hand, while on her left was a snack bowl full of potato chips. Her right knee was bent, and she was standing on one leg. She'd probably opened the sliding door with her foot. Shinobu panicked and was about to sit back down again when the photo frame fell over with a clack. It didn't kick up any dust, so it had been properly cleaned. It seemed somehow incongruous that this place was so well maintained and clean. Even the hinges on the door had been oiled, despite the fact that it didn't seem very lived in. Shinobu cleared her throat and then slowly and deliberately sat back down. The girl explained,
Daddy has to go out at night for his work, so it's just me at home tonight. Don't have to act so shy, Bill.
Daddy? What sort of daddy did she mean?
Oh, and when I say daddy, I mean he's actually my dad. Don't go imagining weird stuff.
I wasn't imagining weird stuff. Shinobu felt like this was the first time in a long time that she'd heard her own voice. It sounded hoarser than she'd expected. Maybe because she was so anxious compared to the high school girl smiling broadly in front of her. When Detective Bell sipped the black liquid offered to her, it fizzed and bubbled in her mouth. The chips were consomme flavored. Consomme potato chips and cola. The girl's tastes were surprisingly down to earth, if a little odd. When Shinobu turned to look out the window, she saw the world below glittering with neon lights. Though the light reaching them seemed so intense, the hustle and bustle had gone away. Shinobu wasn't as hoarse as before, perhaps thanks to the cola.
How did you know I was Detective Bell? I could just tell.
The girl's expression said simply, Why wouldn't I be able to? When Shinobu made a face that insisted, How? The younger girl gave an even more baffled look. Shinobu noticed the teardrop mole under the girl's right eye. It was exactly the same size and position as Lazaline's.
The magical girl and her regular self seem totally different, but they're similar in some ways. My master beat that stuff into my head enough to drive me crazy.
A burst of laughter escaped Shinobu. Fortunately, there was no cola in her mouth, so she didn't make a mess on the rug. The moment after she'd realized that teardrop mole was in the same place as Lazaline's, this girl had said that. The timing was so perfect, Shinobu couldn't help but laugh. Holding her stomach, she chortled for a while, repeatedly wiping away her tears. And when she looked back at her host again, the girl's self-satisfied look had turned sour.
I never said anything funny,
the girl said.
Oh, sorry. My master actually did teach me a bunch of stuff.
The girl stood up and reached out to the top of the dresser. She was taller than Shinobu, so she could reach the photo stand without stretching. Of course, inside the frame was a photo. In it, 2 magical girls stood together, smiling. One was Lapis Lazaline. The other was half a head shorter than her. The girl's blue hair flowed down to her back, and though she was smaller, her gentle smile made her seem older than Lazaline, who was giving a toothy grin.
This is her. You mean your examiner from when you first became a magical girl? No, the old Lapis Lazaline.
Shinobu's brow furrowed. She didn't really understand what that meant.
I'm the second Lapis Lazaline. I inherited the name from the old one.
Each time they hit a point of confusion, Shinobu asked questions, and when their conversation got derailed and sidetracked, she corrected the course until she had slowly but surely gotten the story from the other girl. Before she had become Lapis Lazaline, she had been a magical girl under the name Blue Comet. She worked hard at her job, and the old Lapis Lazaline, who had already gained quite a reputation in the magical kingdom by that name, had identified her talent. The girl said that the old Lapis Lazaline had brought a passionate petition to her, Blue Comet. She was exhausted, body and soul, she'd said. She couldn't continue being a magical girl any longer, but she wanted the name Lapis Lazuli to live on, as proof of what she'd been. If possible, she wanted the name Lapis Lazuli to be passed on down through successive generations forever. In exchange, she had said she would teach Blue Comet everything she knew as a magical girl. She would make her the greatest magical girl ever, if she would just accept her proposal. It had been very selfish. Lapis Lazuli hadn't considered how she might be imposing on someone else, and most wouldn't normally agree to such a self-centered request. But Blue Comet was not a regular magical girl. She was destined to be identified as an odd bird. She loved fun, and she loved having a good time. If she believed she would enjoy herself, she didn't mind discarding her old name to inherit someone else's. A magical girl was, generally speaking, not allowed to change her name. The old Lapis Lazuli had used her status and connections to the fullest in preparation for her name to be passed down. And she hadn't just done the legal work. She had trained Blue Comet to be a magical girl who would not bring shame to the name of Lapis Lazuli. She'd hammered knowledge, skills, training methods, philosophy, and various other things that weren't inherent to magical girlhood into Blue Comet's head. This was how Lapis Lazuli II had been born. Maybe all that talk of special skills and knowledge had been a scam, but Shinobu couldn't say for sure. Back there, she'd just been Shinobu Hyoka, but Lazuli had recognized her for who she really was. She never would have been able to do that without the acumen she described. And so the girl had begun working as the second-generation Lapis Lazuli. Mostly she camped in the mountains to train, and occasionally, to see the fruits of her efforts, she would return home to help people. I see. So that's why her home doesn't seem lived in, thought Shinobu. The reason it was so clean here was because her father was tidying the place up while his daughter was gone. His seemingly irresponsible but oddly diligent nature made sense when you looked at his daughter, who was continuing her training as she'd been taught, even after inheriting her new name. "What about school?" Shinobu asked. "I quit. Being the magical girl, I just don't have the time. Well, I do hang out with friends and stuff, but I don't go do everything with them as much as I did before." "Your dad allows this?" "Daddy trusts me." Once in a blue moon, you ran into a father who could never confront his daughter about being irresponsible, because he himself was irresponsible. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's pretty apt here," Shinobu thought. Not like it's any of my business, but it is worrying, you know. So why are you dressed like that if you're not in school?" "My clothes come from before I became a magical girl, don't fit right no more, and going out in a jogging suit seems kind of weird. So then all I got is my old high school uniform." "And the makeup?" "Oh, it's usually in the fridge." Shinobu hadn't been asking where the makeup was. She'd been asking for a concrete reason as to why she was wearing it, but she got the feeling that questioning her further would be foolish. And why was she the one asking in the first place? Shinobu had followed her here, figuring she'd been interrogated, but instead Lapis Lazuli had served her snacks and pop, and told the story of how she had gotten her name. Aren't you going to talk about other stuff?" "Other stuff? Like more serious matters?" "Serious matters." The girl sat cross-legged, arms folded and head tilted. What was puzzling her so much? "Aren't you curious about why I came here?" Shinobu finally just said it herself. "Why you came here? To hang out, right?" No. Why would I come to hang out at a time like this? If not, then... She suddenly tilted her head the other way and lifted her chin to look up at the sky. Or not. She seemed to be eyeing the plastic grip attached to the end of the string that dangled from the fluorescent light. "Oh, I get it." She clapped her hands. "You wanted to hammer out our plans or something, didn't you? You're totally right. We have to talk shop. Man, I gotta do better next time." She stuck her tongue out of the side of her mouth and rapped herself on the head. When the girl had told Shinobu that the previous lapis lazuli had selected her, Shinobu had thought she was just chosen based on her color theme, wasn't she? The teenager had proudly claimed that her talent had been discovered, but a magical girl named Lapis Lazuli had to have a blue color theme. Looks would be more important than talent or personality in that regard. So the previous Lapis Lazuli must have hit up all the blue-colored magical girls, and Blue Comet had been the only one of them to accept, or so Shinobu had figured. Now she thought that assumption had been wrong. It had to be because of her personality. For better or for worse, she wasn't very picky. She was surprisingly unconcerned and nonchalant about anyone that might do her harm and didn't worry about anything until it actually happened. She might never notice even if something did happen. The culprit wasn't her. Suspecting this girl would get Shinobu nowhere. There was no point. Just indulging her doubts about her was a waste. Why had she even come here? Her head was all messed up with distrust and paranoia, and now she wasn't acting logically. It was all because of Melville had said that weird stuff. This was basically Melville's fault. Shinobu snatched up her cup, guzzled down the cola in one go, and let out a huge burp. This is basically Melville's fault.
Oh, Melvie, huh?
Yeah, I'm worried about her. There's nothing to worry about, really. She seems okay. Shinobu got the impression Melville was tremendously okay. She had so much okayness that Shinobu wished she would share.
What's the matter, Belle? You look beat. Well, guess that's no shocker. We're all working like dogs in the game, and you even got more to do since you're a detective and stuff in real life, huh?
Well, I am tired, but anyway, I have to go.
Huh? You ain't even done nothing yet. You can't just go.
The girl stopped her, begging her to at least stay to see her daddy, so Shinobu was forced to wait until he came back to pay her respects. From afar, the girl's father looked plain and respectable, and not at all like his daughter. But when Shinobu spoke with him, he seemed delighted to have been able to meet his first real detective, and his fanboying convinced Shinobu that he and his daughter were clearly cut from the same cloth after all. Though the plan had been that Shinobu would just greet the girl's father and then go, her host took her hand after that and dragged her around town. Shinobu ended up furiously singing her heart out at karaoke, drinking an endless river of booze, singing some more, and repeating the process until she passed out. Have another sip. Shadowgale. Conaway's laptop was open on her desk, and Conaway's cushion was lying at her feet. Conaway's aroma diffuser was sitting on her windowsill, imbuing the room with Conaway scent. Atop the chair was Conaway's balance ball, and on top of that was Conaway herself. Since she was sitting on two things at once, her head was high off the ground. Momori, sitting on the bed facing her to talk, was inevitably forced to look up at her. It was irritating enough already that Conaway had taken over more of Momori's room, but making her look up at her simply to talk was going too far. Perhaps she was aware that Momori was grinding her teeth, thinking, "Why do I have to put up with this?" Or perhaps not, but Conaway continued with pride.
The next area is the Evil King's Castle. And it's not just the name that suggests this area as the last. We've discovered a message that says as much too. We should be close to completion.
You're saying that the game is almost over? Asked Momori.
That's right.
And if so, why have you been making me do all that work?
Just in case.
Really? Is that it?
I'd never lie to you, would I?
Kanoe gave her a well-mannered smile, and the balance ball swayed. It was on top of an unstable chair, and Momori silently prayed for her to fall, but Kanoe put her hand on the chair's armrest and regained her balance.
So things are going well on your end, Momori?
If you say it's going well, I suppose it probably is. Before Momori had tried it, she'd been worried about whether or not it would succeed, and when it had worked out in reality, she'd been honestly glad. But having to do it so many times had killed her initial joy and transformed it into pure woe at the misery that was her life of performing the monotonous task. It was a lot like a hen being forced to lay eggs forever and ever.
No issues?
Kanoe asked. Just doing the same thing over and over and over.
I see. It's good things are going smoothly on your end. Oh, and it's all going quite well for me, too. It was my first time in a party of 4, and I had my qualms about whether things would go smoothly in a mixed unit formed from 3 parties, but those concerns have been dispelled entirely. I think I've managed to build such easy relationships with them. It's as if we've known one another not only since the game began, but long before.
Good for you.
Oh, good night, Scronin. Have a wonderful night. Sweet dreams. My concerns regarding combat were unfounded. Lapis Lazuli is more suited to fighting than I expected. She's strong and fast, of course, but she's fantastic in other ways as well. She has a firm, fine-tuned grasp on how to incorporate her magic in battle. She moves with such skill. She doesn't just rely on her physical power as a magical girl. It's like she's had martial arts training. After an endless stream of talk, Kanoe suddenly pressed her lips shut and looked at Momori. It seemed she'd finally noticed how indifferent her replies were. Momori, are you angry?
Momori didn't reply. With a thin smile, she gazed up at Kanoe. She gestured toward the door with her right hand, stiffly like a rusted-out robot. Miss.
What is it?
The door is over that way.
How kind of you to trouble yourself. Thank you for letting me know.
Kanoe bounced down off the balance ball, leaving her ball, cushion, laptop.
Your stew? Hedgehog stew?
Stew? Hedgehog stew? Did it say stew?
Kanoe bounced down off the balance ball, leaving her ball, cushion, laptop, and other personal effects where they were. She strode down toward the door, put her right hand on the knob, and then muttered, "Oh, that's right," as if she'd just remembered something.
I may have been a fool who failed to recognize the limits of her own ability.
What?
I'm talking about bragging, about being able to do something that I couldn't.
Without another word, she left the room. After she was gone, Momori forgot her anger and recalled what Kanoe had said. That sort of remark would have been unthinkable for her normally. Were things perhaps not going well in Kanoe's party? Had she not been tormenting or teasing Momori just now, but rather venting her irritation? Momori stared at the door Kanoe had gone through. Master side number 7. The only sound was the regular click, click, click of the turning Rubik's Cube and the hum of the active computers. The only moving things were the cube, transforming atop the girl's fingertip, and the magical girls displayed on the monitors.
I wonder if Snow White's angry.
There was no one to reply to the girl's remark. Heedless, she continued.
I thought we could be friends, though.
The door creaked. When she glanced over to the entrance, she saw the door had been ajar, and the breeze had moved it. There were no guests here, so that hard hit before must have broken it. The girl sighed and snapped her fingers. The door, which had been swinging back and forth without closing entirely, now shut.
Well, I'm at it.
She snapped her fingers again. Pixelated blocks swallowed up the door, gradually becoming finer and then disappearing. Once the cubes were gone, the door had transformed from one with a knob into an automatic sliding door made of clouded glass. All the while, the girl continued turning the cube on her fingertip as the situation on the monitors changed moment by moment.
We'll get to the Evil King's castle soon. Well, I think they might be surprised. One of them is up to some weird stuff, so maybe it'd be a good idea to keep her from doing that next time she tries. It's not like anything goes here, even if it's not technically against the rules. And then there's the weather. A night with no stars and no moon, and a blue sky with just sun and no clouds aren't great for a game that sells itself on realism, especially when they never change. I just lost interest in a lot of this stuff at some point, you know? But it sounds like some of the players really aren't into that. I do want to meet some of those expectations when I make the new magical girl raising project, you know?
The girl glanced over at the magical phone. The power was still off, and it didn't react in the slightest.
I really should do something about that sidekick. It's a pain in the butt for a master to have to monitor the situation and do everything else themselves. Like, going on strike isn't gonna get you anywhere. Just do your job already.
The only thing Fall was doing was explaining the rules and other things within the game to the girls, perhaps wanting to help them out. She'd warned that if the girls got any hints or direct answers, she'd delete the whole game, players and all, so Fall wasn't going to defy her. But despite the order not to tell them directly, the mascot could still provide leads that a sharp magical girl could pick up on, like that time with the event where the one with the fewest candy would lose. Paul had deliberately emphasized that
the player who holds the smallest amount of candy will die. Well, it's fine if that's all it is, I guess,
the girl thought. She wasn't about to challenge Fall over it.
Don't tell them directly
meant that indirect means we're not disallowed, so she would keep to what she'd said.
Just read them the lines I've ordered you to read, though. No additions. If there's any funny business, I'm deleting the whole game.
She gave Fall a warning at least. There was no reply, but the sidekick had to have heard her. If Fall was going to be giving out clues, then it was a good thing she'd kept the truth about the Evil King to herself. If they got any hints about the Evil King, even in an indirect way, everything would be spoiled. The girl hated the Evil King, but even so, she'd gone to a lot of trouble to make this game. Keeping secrets from her helper, to whom she would normally have to tell everything, did make this game more game-like, though. The fact that only the master knew about the Evil King was what made this into a real game. She wanted to take advantage of the next time, too. The girl pulled her finger away from the Rubik's Cube. Even with its support gone, the cube kept clicking and shifting in midair. Chapter 8. Nothing Left Anymore. Noko. Though it had been explained to her beforehand, Noko was startled when she logged into the game and found herself suddenly in the library area with Flea, Detect Bell, and Lapis Lazuli nearby. When Noko was surprised, she wouldn't be the only one feeling it, since she transmitted her emotions around her, so she calmed herself down as best she could and looked around. The full party was there, and Detect Bell and Lapis Lazuli yelped in shock as they looked around. The initial location switch device that Flea had acquired through R was a convenient item. It could change where a party would appear when they logged into the game. No matter how fast magical girls were, going all the way from the wasteland to their desired area was still a lot of wasted effort. Though new gates between the regions appeared in various places once an area was unlocked, like from the wasteland to the mountains, or from the mountains to the library, they'd learned where these were from the map application. It still took time to get around. There was one more reason that Noko was glad to have the initial location switch device. Nobody said it out loud, but this was the more important reason. It was because of how Masked Wonder had been murdered and her items stolen. The killer had done it in the period between when they logged in and when she would have met up with her party. They'd gotten her while she was alone. With this device, that interval would vanish for them. The whole party would be together from the moment they logged in. The vague understanding that the culprit had been Meow Meow had proliferated among all the girls. In Noko's opinion, this was because Genopsycho had hinted that there was a traitor. Since she had already suggested that it might be the case, they believed she had sacrificed her life to tell them who it was. Noko, who had been with Meow Meow and Genopsycho, didn't think that was true, but if asked, "So what do you think?" she would stall and say she didn't really know. Noko didn't think Meow Meow was the culprit, but her opinion wasn't going to convince anyone, and she wasn't going to try to convince them. But she was certain there was still someone among them who meant harm, and she wanted to be as alert as possible for that. Noko wasn't a powerful fighter, so she had to rely on others to be alert for her as well. This meant that it was best for her to stick with her party as much as possible. If Noko were some fantastically powerful magical girl, the game might have already ended by now. But that was just an escapist fantasy, so Noko decided to focus on grappling with reality. The proliferation of the theory that the traitor was Meow Meow also supported an idea that had been suggested earlier, that all the parties cooperate. The elimination of the suspicious individuals had eased their anxieties about talking to someone whose loyalties were unknown. Now that the end of the game was in sight, the two parties had the chance to cooperate whenever it was even slightly useful for completion. They were bringing each other hints, helping out when more numbers were needed, and attempting to share knowledge of the monsters as much as possible. In the course of their monster killing, the others brought the items Noko's party had requested. Clientele speaking little, Nonoko, Miyokata, and Rionetta quarreling, and Pechka being timid. She was always nervous and flustered.
I'm surprised she was able to become a magical girl, if that's how she is,
thought Noko. Though it was technically cooperation between all parties, there were only two, so if both of them were a mind to cooperate, that would end up happening. Even Melville, who was apparently off somewhere exploring alone, would pop up from wherever she had been to help them some, bearing hint messages she found or information regarding places that seemed to be quest-related. And speaking of soloists, Shadowgale was most likely herself too, but Noko had no idea what she was doing, and were right about them. Their party never encountered her, even though they explored every corner of the library area. She might have been somewhere else, but what would she be doing outside the library at this point? When Noko had asked Flea, she simply shrugged in a sort of blunt refusal, saying,
I suppose she's just doing whatever she wants.
Between the strength and nature of the monsters and the ability to avoid battles by sitting in a chair, the library area was, as the word library might imply, not as combat-focused as the subterranean area had been. This was also apparent in the quest to unlock the Evil King's castle. Compared to the quest to defeat the Great Dragon, it required more brains, or rather, more persistence.
I'd love to get some hints on the correct order here,
said Detect Bell.
Squares into a circle, huh?
Flea muttered.
A bunch of the tiles are the same, too. The covers and pages are all the same, only the titles differ. But you're saying some titles are identical.
Oh, I can show the next image. It's Noko and Lapis Lazuli. Flea and Detect Bell were discussing the order of the books. It was basically a code so Noko went around the library in search of books so as to not bother the pair.
Oh, hello, colorful cast. How are you doing?
Welcome. Not only was Lazaline a good fighter, but also her intuition was sharp. Even when monsters would catch them in a pincer attack from before and behind, she could deftly manage their attacks without even glancing over her shoulder. When Noko was exploring with her, they never got caught by surprise, which was really reassuring.
All thanks to my master's training,
Lazaline had said. Noko was thankful to this master, who was now retired from being a magical girl, according to Lazaline. There was an empty bookshelf on the eastern side of the library, without even a single book. What's more, while most books in the library had only a few white pages, a few featured pages of such a deep red, Noko suspected that if she ran her finger down one, it would dye her fingertip.
Oh, my microphone seems less good today? Wonder why that is.
I'm not sure why that would be. I could definitely listen back after stream though. Uh-oh. It's good to know. Might have to tweak some things in voice mod or something. Let me also voice mod is my selected microphone. I'm not sure what would be the cause. According to the hints in the library, collecting these books and setting them up into the empty bookshelf in a specific order would open the gate into the next area. But though it had been hinted that there was a specific order, there were no instructions on what that was. They had to figure that part out on their own. Their only other hint was the phrase, squares into a circle. Oh, that's definitely our fan. I'm not a fan of our fan. We tried to set up this background noise filter, and it looks like it's on, but I don't know if it's not working as well as normal. I don't know. Yeah, I really don't like our fan. But I think you said that it seems less good before it came on. So I would like to look into that soon. Probably right after stream. Flea and Detect Bell's heated discussion about the order of the books. It was about the order of books. Noko thought that they should at least gather all the books before they started talking about that. But once they'd gathered about 90%, the pair had leaned in close to each other and started in, no, it's not this, and no, it's not that. Huh. Let me see if I can actually... I wonder if the clean, actually, the background noise filter doesn't apply to clean. I'm going to change my voice to someone else really quick just to see. Oh, it seemed about the same. But it's like the thing about the background noise filter is if you turn it up too high, it cuts your voice out. But I definitely do want to play around with that later. Let's see if I try to turn it off. Our fan is really loud. Say it's on 30. I think it is working to a degree, because when I turned it off, the green bar went up. Now it's down. I really hate our fan. And it used to be worse. This is after they fixed it. Let's see. The moment before Shinobu Hyoka had gone from the real world into the game again, she'd been unconscious. She remembered being in the karaoke booth drinking, and then finally belting out some songs, but her memories ended there. When she came to, she was transformed into Detectbell, sitting on a chair in the library area. After about a minute of confusion, she found out this was the effect of the initial location switch device that Flea had acquired through R. Because R was so unreliable, it hadn't really been a part of the strategy for Detectbell's party, but the device was convenient. Cutting their travel time short put her at ease. Maybe it's not such a bad idea to give R a shot if we've got the spare candy, she thought. But the game would probably be over before they had any to spare. Magical Girl Raising Project was finally reaching its climax. Okay, I'm glad that the filter is working to some degree, but I'm curious if we can bump that up a little bit. Because, we listened back to a Chalky stream one night, and it was really hard to understand what she was saying, we realized, because it was like the background noise filter was like filtering out consonants. It's like hard to get it just perfect. I could turn the filter up a little bit and see if that helps. It's on 30. Right. Now it's at 50. But I hope it's not like making it harder to understand me. I honestly do really appreciate feedback, though. It helps a lot. Oh, my voice seems quieter. Maybe I'll put it at 40. Oh, now it turned off. Let's see. I think it was at 50 when we heard that it was cutting out Chalky's voice quite a bit. So maybe 40 is the way to go. Wait, did the music end? Is it? Okay, it's very close to the end. With the help of Clantail's party and Melville too, they collected enough of the red books to fill the empty bookshelf. They invited Clantail to help them figure out what order the books had to go in, but she had replied that they would leave the puzzle solving to Flea's party, and in the meantime their party would go kill some monsters to stock up candy. Melville gave them the same answer, so Detectbell figured that perhaps their interest in this subject simply differed. While she was discussing with Flea, Detectbell tried putting the books on the shelf a number of times and failed. The bookshelf wouldn't accept books in the wrong order. She would make a beeping sound and spit them all out again. Then she would pick them all up and consider the matter again from a different angle. Detectbell tried holding the books over a flame. She tried sniffing them. She tried dripping water on them. Then Flea informed her that she'd already tried all those things, so Detectbell gave up on that. She flipped through the pages and racked her brains, wondering if there was some kind of pattern. Even using her magnifying glass, she couldn't find anything. Squares into a bell, squares into a... Squares into a circle, squares into a circle, squares into a circle.
Belle! Belle!
Well, lost in thought, Detectbell suddenly heard someone speaking to her. She looked up and saw Lazaline grinning at her.
What?
She asked.
Think being a detective's a good idea.
For who?
For me.
Why?
I always thought you were this cool, clever detective. I had no idea you had all that passion bottled up inside. After I heard that super enthusiastic speech, I just had to be a detective myself. And well, I've been thinking lately that I can't always have my daddy be paying for an unemployed magical girl. I use all the skills my master taught me to work to become the legendary detective, Lapis Lazuli! Oh, okay. Now Detectable knew what she had been babbling about and to whom while she'd been drinking. But now that she knew, she really didn't want to be hearing about it at that moment. She didn't want Lazaline to blab about anything else. And not just because the other magical girls would hear. She didn't want Lazaline going on about Detective's drunken nonsense as if it were praiseworthy. All right, then as your first step on the path to... Oh, wait, sorry. All right, then as your first step on the path to being a detective, come help me investigate. Roger! I'm more quiet. We don't hear the fan when you're not talking, and a little bit while you're talking. Yeah. I think that's how the background filter works. I think it can only filter out the background when there's silence. I can also turn up the voice changer volume. Now this is at 100. I don't know if... I'm assuming this turns up my voice. I also wonder if there's like a program outside of voice mod that works well with background noise filtering or something. Detectable had come to understand something from being at a party with Flea. Detectable was not very good at solving puzzles. Back in the real world, she could use her magic and physical strength to solve mysteries. But the moment she had come into the game and had her magic restricted, she'd come to a halt. Flea was abnormally sharp. Detectable couldn't even feel jealous. She seemed very much like the famous detective Shinobu had admired. She ended up thinking, well, maybe some detectives just aren't as good at deduction. The person voicing Lapis Lazuli hear very well. Meadow's regular voice is difficult to hear at times. Oh, that makes sense. I can have my microphone a little bit closer. It was a little funny that she could consider the idea and be so calm about it. Now she couldn't understand why she'd been so upset when Melville had left. Had she changed because they were close to their goal? Or because Lazaline had recognized her? For better or for worse, Lazaline's carefree antics made Detective less anxious. Why had she been so paranoid before? It was all so baffling. For her own part, Lazaline was humming as she fought monsters. Detective couldn't be like that, nor did she want to. Detective thoroughly searched the library area and came back with the last hint. First comes now. Now, Flea took a book in one hand. It was a book titled precisely that, Now. So beginning with the book titled Now, make the squares into a circle, Flea muttered as she began setting books on the bookshelf. The title Now was 3 letters long. The next book in line had a title that was 14 letters long. Next, she took a book as she looked for a book that had 15 letters, and after that 9, and then she searched for a long title with 26 letters, then 5, and then 3. 3.14159265358979932. Squares into a circle. That is to say, use the square books to make a pie. Voice has a bit of biting muffle, but I turned you all the way up. Oh, I could turn the filtering back the way it was. Maybe. Because it might be. Is this better? I put it back at 30. I really hate our fan. And I hate, more than the fan, I hate how
it really shouldn't be 80 degrees in here when it's snowing outside. I don't know why our apartment is like that, or if there's anything that can be done about that, but it's very expensive and terrible. Um, Flea had figured out that you had to line the books in the shelf by the number of letters in their titles to create pi, and they opened the gate to the evil king's castle. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it's better. I just ended up putting it back where it was. So nothing ended up getting changed in the end. But at least I know that I shouldn't mess with it again. At least it's better than having it completely off. Shadowgale. Each new area of the game had different smells. The wasteland area smelled like earth. The grassland area smelled like air. And here, the odor of mold hung over everything. Perhaps because it was a game, the smells wouldn't follow you if it left an area. It wouldn't get into your clothes or on your skin either. That was an honest relief to Shadowgale. She could put up with the earth and the grass. But mold had to be near the top of the list of smells she couldn't stand. It would have been absolutely miserable if it had stuck to her clothes and skin and never come out. A magical girl should smell like flowers and fruit. If she had to appear with a whiff of mold, she'd be a joke. The moldy smell hanging all around her, Shadowgale set the dragon killer in her firing device and pointed it toward the great dragon. The dragon threatened her with a deafening roar that shook the entire cavern. The first time she heard that sound, she'd shuddered from the depths of her soul, but now she heard it so many times that it just seemed repetitive and didn't bother her. She pressed the switch on the firing device, and the dragon killer shot off. She got a perfect hit on the great dragon, and the earth trembled as it fell. This felt pedestrian to her, too. The first dragon time, she trembled with joy at having defeated the great dragon all by herself, but that emotion had quickly evaporated, too. She didn't even remember how many times she'd done this already. By defeating the great dragon, she won the dragon shield. Now she didn't even have to look at her magical phone. She knew the item was there. Cautiously avoiding all the various traps set on the floor here, Shadowgale left the cavern. Flea had told her that as long as there was a player killer out there, she should be extremely cautious when on her own. So Shadowgale had set up a trap within the great dragon's cavern. The trap would also fire mercilessly on anyone who stepped in innocently, but according to Flea, if that happened, they were just unlucky. But at this point in time, the library was the newest area, and everyone would be exploring and killing monsters over there. Shadowgale would be the only one secluding herself down here, defeating the great dragon over and over. She sighed. Mid-game bosses generally didn't respond, but selling off the special item the great dragon dropped made the event recur and revived it. Flea had been the one to discover this fact. So Shadowgale had to take the shield to the top and sell it off. Once she'd sold it, she'd confront the great dragon once more. She could see no end to this loop. Petchka. By the way, we are like 6 or 7 pages, about 6 pages, to the end of where I wanted to stop for tonight, just to let you know. A mysterious sweet scent floated in the air, though it wasn't the only thing here. The sparkling marble floors were starkly different from the old wooden floorboards of the library area. There was not a single scratch on the ground, and the tapping of hooves on it sounded pleasant. Though they were indoors, there was no risk of Plantail kicking through the floor, and she could freely transform into large animals. Rianetta scowled and pressed her skirts in.
This floor is so sorely overpolished, it even reflects the underside of my skirts. Yeah, and everyone wants to see a doll's bloomers, Hein. If you must say such vulgar things, then please do it when I'm not present.
Rianetta and Nonoko were at it as usual. They never changed, even now in the final area. It seemed like they were deliberately sniping at each other, even keeping everything the same. Their fight seemed a bit more forced than usual, or maybe it just looked that way to Petchka because she was anxious. The final area, the Evil King's castle. It was a splendid marble-wrought palace. The hallways, big enough for 5 Petchkas to lie next to each other spread eagle-wide, were decorated at intervals with sculptures, large statues, and great paintings in magnificent frames. But because of the Evil King part of the castle's name, all the art had some twisted element to it. Battle wings, growing from the back of a beautiful woman, bat-like wings, or 2 curving goat horns on the temples of a bearded gentleman. After they had passed through the gate from the library area, they had immediately emerged into a hallway. The gate behind them was at a dead end, and the hallway extended before them about 100 yards before it turned to the right.
Everyone, good luck. Don't let your guard down,
said Flea, sitting on her magic carpet at the center. The assembled magical girls all nodded. The members of Petchka's party weren't the only ones there. Detect Bell's group was there too, along with Flea, Shadowgale, and Melville, who Petchka hadn't seen in a while, and Noko too. And I think, yes, the music was over. Let me open another one. Shadowgale was eyeing Flea a little resentfully. Something had probably happened between the two of them. When they encountered monsters, they'd check the monster encyclopedia list first. They weren't about to go immediately charging in simply because they'd discovered the Evil King's location. Going off on your own was strictly forbidden. No rushing, no impatience. Counting on her fingers, Petchka double-checked that everyone was there. It was looking like there'd be no particular issues if they proceeded as usual.
Now then, let's go,
said Flea. None of them were fixated on parties anymore. With the formerly solo Melville and Shadowgale added to the group, they promised solidarity to each other. In the lead were Clantail, Lapis Lazuli, and Rionetta. The second line consisted of Melville, Noko, and Detect Bell. The third line consisted of Petchka and Flea on her magic carpet. At the rear were Nonoka, Miyokata, and Shadowgale. Fortunately, the ceiling was over 30 feet high, so they positioned Nonoko's dragon in the air as a support/confusion tactic/scout for when the time came. Plus, it could also watch out for attacks from above. This arrangement had most likely been decided based on their abilities, roles in combat, or whatnot. But to Petchka, being separated from the allies she knew and positioned among magical girls she didn't know very well, was anxiety and stress-inducing. She was beginning to timidly walk forward when she received a poke in the rear. Her heart leaped into her mouth.
Relax, s'il vous plaît. I said it'd protect you, Petchka,
said Nonoka Miyokata.
Oh, of course. Thank you very much.
Petchka was grateful and glad, but she felt she could rely on Nonoko. And she felt she could rely on Nonoko, for she would rather hear it in a way that didn't give her a heart attack.
Oh, stop!
A loud voice came from up front, and Petchka's heart jumped again.
There's something on the ground. It's set to spring something on you if you step on it.
What Lazaline was pointing at looked like a completely normal spot on the marble floor.
Man, it's the final level, so there's gonna be traps and stuff, you know? I was zoning out since we ain't seen nothing like that so far. I just found it at the last minute. I was real close, seriously.
They all murmured anxiously. Can you see anything? Yeah. Oh, you're right. There's signs. It's been tampered with. I can't tell.
She says something is that. What's a careless mistake?
Some of the girls couldn't tell at all. Some at least noticed something was off. Some could notice if they looked closely, and others could tell clearly from a distance, even from a distance. Well, only Lazaline to do that, but apparently there was some variation in what they saw. Flea clapped her hands. Everyone shut their mouths and turned their attention to her.
There's no question that something is there?
She asked Oh wait, sorry. That's Flea.
There's no question that something is there?
She asked Lazaline.
I mean, can't you just tell by looking?
The issue here was that some of them couldn't, but Lazaline was operating on the assumption that they were all on the same page. They weren't.
I'd like to avoid any problem spots as we move along. It's highly likely someone might inadvertently step on one of these. So then should I mark it?
Lazaline suggested.
That would be all right if what the trap senses is weight or body heat, but if vibration is the trigger and it activates the moment it's touched, it'll be no laughing matter.
I have an idea. Rianetta raised her hand. The way her ball joints bent was human-like, extending elegantly to the tips of her fingers. The sound of marble striking marble was obnoxiously loud and grating to the ears. The weight of the stone statue had to be measured in tons, and the vibrations reached all the way to Pechka, over 150 feet away. The large golem's feet slowly thundered down the hallway of the evil king's castle.
Right around there, is that correct?
Asked Rianetta.
Yeah, a little to the right. There, right there,
replied Lazaline. The muscular marble statue, wearing only a loincloth to cover the necessary areas, dropped its foot on the part of the floor Lazaline indicated. As the powerful blast roared, purple flashes burned on the girl's retinas.
Seems that was a lightning trap,
said Flea. The marble all around was soot black. The muscular statue that had stepped on the trap was covered all over in soot, too, but it still lifted its foot with a creak from the spot where the trap had been. Somehow, it could still keep walking.
Hold on just a sec, guys.
Lazaline trotted up to the center of the explosion site and then gave a wave.
The trap's gone! Looks like once you step on it once, it's done. Fantastic, said Flea. Well then, let's proceed with this plan. We'll have the statue scout for us and step on traps for us. That will be safest.
A high-pitched laugh sounded out. Rianetta's right hand was against her mouth as she laughed haughtily.
Seems that finally I can put my specialty to good use. I hadn't seen a single doll this far, so I was worried that I might perhaps spend this whole game just as another fighter. So a statue counts as a doll to you?
Nonaka Miyokata remarked.
Your magic is unreasonably flexible, Hein. I shan't accept such accusations from someone who treats everything from goblins to dragons as beasts.
Oh, wait. Sorry. I just assumed that was Melville saying that because it started with Shat. I think that was Rianetta.
I shan't accept such accusations from someone who treats everything from goblins to dragons as beasts.
They had 3 marble statues in total. One with a black goat head, a human torso, and a goat's lower body. A beautiful woman with large bat's wings growing from her back, and the macho statue that had just crushed the trap. Rianetta said that a doll's speed and ability to take a hit depended on what it's made of, and that the marble statues were slow to move and solidly built. The statues would not be suited to fighting faster monsters, but would be optimal for stepping on traps, Rianetta had proudly declared. Pechka also understood quite well how good it felt when your apparently useless magic had its moment of glory. Since now they knew there were traps, their formation had been adjusted slightly. The 3 marble statues stomped along heavily over 150 feet ahead of the group.
I could control quite a few more, but too many would become a hindrance, I dare say,
Rianetta commented. Lapis Lazuli joined the statues as their scout, since she had been the first one to discover that trap. There had been some concern as to what Lazuli would do if they ran into monsters, and she became the focus of their attacks. but she had said,
I'll just hand one of these to Taylor in the front. With my super teleportation powers, I can pop right over there if something happens up there, so I'll be okay.
Leslie's magic was instant teleportation to her lapis lazuli. She could teleport anywhere as long as there was a gem there. If Lazaline handed one of her gems to someone in the rear guard, she could join them immediately. The tech bell gave Lazaline strict orders to come straight back to them if any monsters appeared, no matter how weak they looked, and Lazaline was deployed with a vanguard to scout for enemies and traps. And so they made their way forward, checking for threats as they went. Slowly and steadily, inch by inch, they proceeded down the hall. Occasionally they discovered a trap, and each time, Lazaline and 2 of the 3 statues would retreat, while the remaining statue was set off. There was a lightning trap, flammable gas with an ignition device, line of spears, explosions, and a trap that looked like a mysterious glowing magic sigil. They couldn't tell at a glance what that one did. Going through a number of the traps destroyed the statues, so Rionetta activated new ones from among the statues decorating the hall and incorporated them into their formation. The hallway was long. It didn't just seem that way because they were forced to advance so slowly. There were actually no rooms and no doors aside from the gates they first walked in through.
I see,
Flea muttered as she turned on her magical phone and examined the screen. Taking a peek from the side, Petchka could see she had launched the map application that showed them their surroundings.
Seems we're going clockwise toward a center.
The screen displayed a spiral-like shape. It went forward, then turned, forward, right, over and over.
Now that she mentions it, she's right.
We've never gone left, thought Petchka. So far, they turned right twice, so that meant they were still circling the outer perimeter. The magical phone also displayed the current locations of their party members.
Stop!
Leslieine called out from the front, and everyone stopped. About 50 yards ahead on the vanguard, and 100 ahead of Petchka and the rest, light was streaming in from one of the hall. Flea checked the map displayed on her magical phone.
There's an opening about 15 feet wide that leads to a space of about 30 feet. It doesn't look to be connected to anything beyond. It may be a terrace of some sort.
Leslieine walked briskly, craning her neck to peer at the opening that was letting the light through. Tech Bell's fists were clenched and trembling as she muttered,
"How can she act so unguarded?"
Leslieine, oblivious to Detect Bell's internal anxieties, slipped nimbly into the light. This time she poked just her head back out of it, then turned toward them.
"Found the shop!"
"Oh!" someone exclaimed. The girls all quickened their pace a little to join Leslieine, breaking off into groups to visit the shop and check out the goods. Just as Flea had predicted, it was a balcony that let in light and air from the outside. Its railing was finely ornamented with the same sort of devilish creatures featured in the paintings and carvings adorning the castle halls. On the middle of the railing sat a bisque urn about half as big as Petchka herself. When they activated their magical phones here, the displays indicated that the urn was the shop. Apparently, transactions were carried out by putting things into and taking things out of the urn. Some of the girls wanted to discuss the shop's items, while others were hungry and looking to eat something. And since these 2 suggestions didn't conflict, they decided to take a break for a meal in front of the shop. Since there were now more than twice as many people as had been in her party before, Petchka was that much busier. She packed the debris from the broken marble statues into a pot and made congee with lots of vegetables and meat. The smell of Petchka's cooking wafted into the air, overwhelming the characteristic sweet scent of this area. The aroma of the dish sped up and slowed down, drafting around the group with emotion from everyone's spoons. There's everyone eating together. There's Pechka and Noko at the top. And it's looks like Rianetta on the top right. And Lazaline's in the middle with the Tech Bell on the left. Is that Melville on the right of her, I think? And then Flea and Shadowgale closest to us. Oh, I see Lazaline on the right of... No, wait. Sorry, not Lazaline. Who is that on the right of Rianetta? I think that might be Nonoko. Either Nonoko or Clantail. Yeah, they seem so happy together in this book. I'm sure it won't last that way for long, though. They're working together. This smell was far more calming. Pechka breathed a sigh.
This is so good,
Crowed Lapis Lazuli.
crazy good. Y'all were keeping the good stuff to yourselves. It's a crime. So says the girl from the party that kept the hunting grounds to themselves. A gall,
Rianetta quipped.
That's different. Man, this is so damn good. You don't have to scarf it down so fast. No one's going to steal it from you.
Detect Bell admonished Lazaline for her bad manners as the girl in blue intently gobbled down her food. Meanwhile, beside her, Detect Bell herself was eating as if her life depended on it. Flea's demeanor belied the amount she was packing into her stomach as she commented on the seasoning, cooking method, and ingredients. Shadowgale was still eyeing Flea resentfully, but even so, she seemed to be enjoying the food. Pechka didn't really understand what Melville was saying, and Lazaline wasn't translating since she was concentrating on eating instead. But from Melville's expression and reactions, Pechka figured she was probably being complimentary. Noko helped serve everyone. As a maid, she was used to it. Oh, that must be Clantail on the... Oh, wait. I see... Who is, like, on the left of Pechka that you can just barely see? I have to sneeze. Hang on. Okay. I think Clantail's on the right of Rianetta. Our right, I mean. Clantail's tail was wagging widely. Widely? And for some reason, Notoko was proudly bragging about the food. Pechka didn't let it show much, but in fact, she was even prouder than Nonoko that they all enjoyed her cooking. Pechka was bad at fighting, average at exploring, couldn't solve puzzles, and didn't have any other useful skills or magic. Cooking was the only thing she could do to make everyone happy, and it made her glad. The smell of the food stuck to them. Even after the meal was done, the kanji's aroma wafted on ahead, drowning out the sickly sweetness of the evil king's castle. Pechka prayed that it would last forever. Well, that's a cute way to end. I'm kind of surprised that it ended on such a happy note. Because there is much murder ahead. Let me switch to my other... Oh, I'll delete this. Let me turn... face you. Thank you for joining me for Magical Girl Raising Project Night. It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy these reading streams. I do these every third stream of mine. The next one will probably be in about 3 weeks from now. Let's see, I think I'll raid Radicoon. Unless someone has a raid suggestion for someone who has not so many viewers. We have 70, so I kind of prefer raiding someone with less, but I think I'll go after them if not. Let's see. Our schedule for this week is that our next stream is going to be Tuesday night. Monday is going to be our day off this week. We're hoping to get some work done on our system card tomorrow night. And Tuesday night, we have another Meadow stream. I'm going to be playing Freedom Planet 2. And then we're going to do that like Freedom Planet 1, where we pass around the game, so to speak. I'll be playing as Lilac. And then we're thinking Q will probably be playing as Nira. Magma will be Carol again, and Snuggle will be Neela again. So that will be fun. Then Wednesday night, Magma is doing the Half-Life VR with the AI is self-aware, behind-the-scenes commentary watch party. Probably some Demon Turf custom level playthroughs. Thursday night, my partner Ghost is doing a little bit of some Binding of Isaac as a guest headmate stream. I'm excited for that. Friday night, Q's going to be continuing Stretch Panic. Probably finishing that. Depending on when she finishes that, she might also play a little Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. And then Saturday night, Snuggle and Pookie are going to continue Kirby's Dream Land 3. And Sunday night, Cuddle will be playing Sonic Shuffle with some of our friends. In the meantime, I'm going to raid Radicoon. Shuffle! I'm looking forward to that. Bye! I hope you have a wonderful day or night. Oh, and also in a few minutes, Paulo will be doing Sonic X Watch Party with Fukuma, I believe. So look forward to that if you go to that. But yes, have a wonderful rest of your day or night. Take care of yourself. We love you very much. I'll see you next time.